Freedom Worldwide Podcast. Okay, welcome to Freedom Worldwide Podcast. Welcome back. I know it's been about 2 months since our last episode. We've just had a new real job starting and just shortage of guests that have been available to come on the show, family visits. But we've had somebody that I've wanted to get on the show for a long time now. He was actually one of the brainchilds of the podcast.
I like to see myself as a brainchild.
Yes, there you go. He suggested having a podcast months, maybe last year even, and we finally got around to it, and we finally got him on the show. So, Jeremy Anbleyth-Evans, welcome to Freedom Worldwide Podcast.
Well, thanks for having me, Ray. It's good to catch up.
Yeah. We always get coffees. We always meet for coffee all the time and have conversations, and we always want to get on the podcast. We've been sitting here for about the last 45 minutes trying to get the sound and the video set up because we're amateurs. Finally got there. Jeremy, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? Maybe you can say what you do, what your specialties are, how we met, anything you want to talk about.
Yeah.
Intro.
Well, by way of intro, I'm originally from Cornwall or Carno, so I became interested, I suppose, in the politics of freedom after having a wake-up call about the suppression of the Cornish culture and seeing all the names and places and wondering how it linked to things like my surname and the language and wondering why that occurred. So that led me on a kind of continuous journey as an activist geographer to go out to explore the world and understand how new types of freedom can be expressed and liberated, particularly in terms of the freedoms of space and place, which is that geographical intersection of where power meets places and certainly geographies. So by way of introduction, I do marine human geography, particularly kind of fisheries, conservation, and coastal ecological democracy. So that takes me to lots of different interesting places. I used to live in Chile for 4 years and spent a lot of time going around South America working with Mapuches and going out on different fishing trips and diving around. So been quite lucky in my travels, and certainly I think that's why we started talking about freedom worldwide, isn't it, Ray? Because we started thinking about these types of themes.
Yeah. For anyone who doesn't know, Cornwall is I guess it's not a province. What's the name of in the UK?
It's got an interesting.
It's like southwest. For anyone who doesn't know, it's the very southwest corner of the United Kingdom. The furthest southern point of the United Kingdom is in Cornwall, and it's got some of the best weather and some of the most beautiful scenery in the UK, which unfortunately has led to overpopulation of tourists and rich people from London buying out all the properties there and causing the locals not being able to afford it. And it's not even their first house. It'd be like a rich person's second house, and there's just like empty houses sitting there that nobody can enjoy, even though it's some of the nicest countryside in the UK. But so that's just a little background of what Cornwall, or where Cornwall is.
The duchy it's also known because it's got this weird dual legal status which allows the Duke of Carno to recall the stanary parliaments, which is based around mining originally, but also local legal creation and enforcement through these stanary parliaments. But they were squashed in 1851, and prior to that, the dilution of the Cornish freedom decreased after the Cornish attack on London in 1497 under Angof the Smith, which was the only successful kind of Celtic army's attack on London. So as part of my continuous quest for freedom, I suppose, is is situated in these types of cultural histories of freedom and the commons, and how the commons has evolved over different periods of time. So I was quite inspired touching base on some of the radical histories of Britain recently, trying to understand who owns the land, both in the south, in Cornwall, which is, some say, an independent country, or should be, but also some say it's a county of England. And so finding out who owns the land is quite important. Certainly it's unusual that the duchy controls all the land and inherits all the property and has control over the goodies from the foreshore and the fundus, the rights of Rex and other places. So it's that's been part of my history, Ray, over the years, which like in Scotland, like in Texas as well, and other places you've grown up in, these we're all kind of situated and inspired by those cultural heritages of freedom. I think it's quite interesting to kind of start on.
Yeah, I think it's super interesting because if you really I Googled once who owns the most land in the world, and technically I think the crown their crown estate owns like over 2 billion acres or something. Like if they really wanted to, they could stake claim to like Canada, any of like almost the former Commonwealth colonies like Canada, Australia, New Zealand. Technically, it's all crown land, but that's obviously in the past it was more of a formality. It's more just like a formality now. Obviously, they would never go and like reclaim all that land because it would just, the dissolution of property rights would destroy all the economies of those countries. But on paper, it kind of is somehow technically owned by the crown. A lot of like the UK is technically all crown land. Am I correct?
Well,
in saying that?
It's right, and it's a weird thing about in Britain, we've got these kind of medieval laws that exist on, which have been updated, but because we don't have a written constitution, some of them continue on in the shadows, if you will. So with the crown estate, that used to be all the crown land under the king or the queen, and that turned into a body of land which in the 18th centuries, after the Civil War, after Oliver Cromwell, they ended up during the around the Glorious Revolution, they ended up giving the crown estate to the benefit as an estate which benefits the Parliament, in the sense that the revenue coming from that land would then be added into the national Parliament's budget, whereas in the previous to that, because of the I think it's the bad management of the Stuarts, Charles I, they had an increase of debt and chaos, which led to the Civil War, and eventually people started to wake up to the fact that the crown wasn't a good manager of all of the land. So there was this revolution against it, and in today's system, all the seabed is owned by the crown estate and many other properties besides that on the land. But we've also got the aristocracy, which is still very significant, and the Duchy of Cornwall, for example, is the
What's a duchy, by the way? What's a duchy? A duchy? Is that just like a name for it's like a noble position or something like that? Is that correct?
Well, that's right. It is correct. It's a title, certainly. And so, like, the Duchy of Cornwall is a quasi medieval body which has legal rights over all of Cornwall, but it also has a separate but related property portfolio which stretches much wider. So it generates revenue for the crown, but not the crown estate, the actual king and his family, the head honchos of the Royal Illuminati, the King Charles and his brethren, his close well-wishers and family. Yeah. So the Duchy of Lancaster is another body which is unusual, which is directly providing revenue to the king, whereas the Duchy of Cornwall provides revenue to the Duke of Cornwall, who's also the the Prince of Wales or the next in line to the throne, which is Prince William.
Okay.
So those are kind of private bodies still owned by the crown, whereas the crown estate gives money to the public purse.
Okay. So basically there was a point in time where like taxes collected from those lands were switched over to start benefiting the parliament, because previously the UK was just a absolute monarchy, but now I think it's a constitutional monarchy. Is that correct?
Yes.
So now what that means is that in the past the royal family just kind of had like absolute power over everything, and then at a certain point in time, I think it must have been when the Magna Carta was that when the Magna Carta was written?
Well, the Magna Carta was much earlier, in fact. That happened, which was a kind of survey of all the lands that the William the Conqueror took over, and he wanted to understand who owned what, and thus he could give to his pals who rode over from France across the seas and shot Harold in the eye. He gave those bits of land that he after the survey to his friends that were good warriors and came over with him, and thus you had a network of people with Norman surnames who live on today in various different parts of Britain, who've still got significant amounts of land, and they are part of the 24-odd dukes that continue to exist, like the Duke of Westminster, who controls a big part of West London, and one of the richest people in the UK. And then you've got something like 100-odd marquesses and about 150-odd earls and viscounts and barons as well. And they all sit together as hereditary peers and have lots of kind of subtle influence behind the scenes. So the ultimate point is, if we're ever going to democratise the commons to get freedom for these spaces and places, we need to really understand who owns the land and how we can decentralise it to the people that live in those local places and spaces.
Yeah, so it sounds like basically there's still a big chunk of people, a large group of people that have hereditary ties to the monarchy, who are still just kind of almost privately profiting on the side from a lot of this land ownership. And then obviously some of that goes towards the public funds, the parliamentary public funds, some of those taxes. But would you say that there's still a large amount of people that are just kind of basically they are just kind of inherited?
It's inherited wealth, yeah.
And it's just, they almost don't have to do anything, right? It's just kind of an eternal income stream.
They're rentiers, and just like the royal family should be seen as divorced from the lizards of aristocracy. They're all kind of the same group network together, and because they inherit wealth, they're rentiers. They live off the efforts of other people. So that, for example, there's lots of tenant farmers around Britain, and something like 30% of all the land in England alone is controlled by these aristocratic families that came over in the Norman Conquest and still have huge amounts of influence and political power. It used to be even more, but it's getting a certain amount of international bourgeoisies coming in through tax havens, and the fact that London is the global centre for washing money in the world. So
Wow.
yeah. So it's all kind of interconnected.
Yeah. I mean, it's, you hear a lot about, London is the financial hub of the world, maybe New York or London. But yeah, the fact that, these, I guess, the monarchy still exists in that sense. I mean, when you buy a freehold property, for instance, if I buy like a freehold, land, if I go to a real estate agent here and I buy freehold, is that outside of, so when I'm paying council tax on that freehold land, which is just property taxes for any American audience, just remember we have an American audience, so some of the references that we use, they're not going to be familiar with some of the, I guess, real estate terms that we're using.
That's right. They can look it up.
Yeah. So, so like property tax in the UK is like kind of council tax. You just pay it. It's like a yearly tax you owe on your property. So if you get a freehold land here, you're only paying council tax. That's kind of outside of the collections of these private entities, noble entities, that they're not collecting rent on that, are they? Or a percentage of that council tax, are they?
But you do get leasehold, which is quite different to many places in the world, where you sell a property differently to freehold, and that goes back to like the Duke of Westminster or another person like the Duke of Northumberland, who's got the most amount of land outside the royal family.
Wow.
So that would go back to him after like 50, 70 odd years, and it's pretty unjust because it means that people put all their effort into saving up for the house with the mortgage, and then it just goes back to that royal family again.
Well, a new person has to basically renew the lease or buy the lease, right?
Yeah.
For it to continue. Because my dad owns a few leaseholds in Australia, which is they're obviously a British colony.
Yeah.
So I never quite understood it, but basically you buy the lease for like a 50-year lease. It's kind of like owning it. You have all the rights for 50 years, kind of. But after that 50 years, I think you get the first option of renewing the lease or something like that. I don't know how much you have to pay to renew the lease. My dad's like, no, it doesn't. It's not much to renew. You pretty much just kind of continue it.
The ultimate point is places like Scotland, where we are today, they don't have leaseholds anymore. Until recently, I believe, in other countries in Western Europe, France, Germany, they got rid of leaseholds because they seem to be kind of an unjust mechanism, and that perpetuates the aristocracy and the bourgeoisie. So they got rid of that. And
so there's progress in that sense.
There's been progress in certain places, yeah.
Okay. But England still has a bunch of leaseholds.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, so I guess we can segue, but it's just very, I mean, you could talk about it forever, but just, I didn't quite understand how the property rights and everything work. But so basically there's still some perpetuated systems from the past where there's groups of people that are still basically profiting without doing any work, just because of their inherited position, because they conquered the land.
The rentiers of the world.
Yeah, they're just renting it out. It's almost just leasing out things and just collecting, and with very little work, actually. And, but with all of that said, as much as I like to criticize a system, I also try to look at the other side of it and think, okay, well, it's what type of society has it built and led to? And, you can look at the UK society, and there are definitely always injustices, but, most people seem to be able to live a quite comfortable life, and most people seem to be able to make a living, and for whatever, it could be better. It could be better. It can always be better, right?
Yeah, it could be much better. Like, for example, people in a cost of living crisis, people can't grow their own food, but they could well do if there was a common property system. In the past, we had a form of common property system where you had fields which are kind of owned by the kind of village area. Ultimately, they were still serfs and they were in the manor, but it was recognised as a commons. So in the future, we could to create not only bill saving for people because they could grow their own food with their friends and the local community. Those types of land spaces could be decentralised to local community council areas to have food sovereignty and food self-sufficiency. So we only have so much space on the island, but we also have to import 50% of our land, so it's very kind of inefficient.
The food, import 50% of the food.
Yeah. But we could be food self-sufficient. We could be not only food self-sufficient as the whole of the UK, Britain, but we could also be food self-sufficient for each local community area, for each commons. And I think if we were getting towards that would not only save people a lot of money, but it also mean that people could live the types of lives that they like to do, whether they want to be a guitarist or an artist or somebody who just wants to make beer, just have a good time, but also kind of contribute to these kind of shared upkeep and resources of those local cultural communities.
Yeah, I mean, I think humanity's proven that we, if we work together, we can come up with we can make life easier. Like, I go to work for a few hours. Like, last night I went to work for 4 hours as a waiter at a pizza restaurant. I did 4 hours of work, and that 4 hours is enough to buy me like probably a week worth of groceries and pay a bit of electricity. And, I am getting out more than I put in some senses. Don't get me wrong, I go there and work hard, but for me to basically grow all of that food that I buy for a week and to produce the things that I could buy with 4 hours of work would take me a lot longer than 4 hours. So we've proven that capitalism and working together can in fact benefit us in a lot of ways. But there's still more we can do, I think, to make it even better. For everyone. I mean, if you look at the Netherlands, for instance, they're one of the biggest food exporters in the world, I believe. And they're a smaller country than the UK, and their weather's not any better. I mean, it's probably very similar.
Similar weather in the Netherlands.
Yeah, but I mean, if you look at they're one of the biggest agricultural exporters in Europe. So they've obviously done.
They've got a lot of industrial agriculture there, certainly. Yeah, that's why they're so tall, because they give them huge amounts of dairy products and they end up as giants. Yeah,
I'm like a quarter Dutch or something. I'm like 6'3".
You like to think of yourself as a Dutchman, don't you?
Yeah, I got a mixture, but my mom's mum was Dutch. She was like properly Dutch. Yeah. She was from Holland, and then they emigrated to like the central Congo, the Congo.
Oh, they went to the Congo. That's funny.
My mom's mom was like, as a child, was in the Congo, and then there was like a uprising. I think it was the Mau Maus or something.
Oh, that would be Kenya. In they were from Kenya, the Mau Maus.
Oh no, it must have been someone else. Who was there was the Congo. There was
Belgians. Was she Belgian as well?
No, they were Dutch, but maybe they were Dutch, but they were living in the Congo, and then there was an uprising, and luckily my grandmother's father had a bit of foresight and realized that it was going to be like probably like a massive, like the uprising was going to basically be against the Europeans, and then they left. I don't know the exact story. I have to talk to my mom, but she told me they left to South Africa just before the uprising, and they got out.
Yeah, well, there was some interesting things going on in Congo in lots of different periods, but the true instability today, some say, came when the West tried to get rid of Mobutu Sese Seko, and who was one of the dictators there, and tried to kind of install their own kind of regime there.
Just talk closer to the mic, just a little bit closer, just so you don't have any volume discrepancies.
Sure. So that wasn't. I've never been to the Congo. I'd love to go. I've got lots of friends who are elephants and gorillas and other things. So I'd like to go and catch up with them. They always send me postcards.
Yeah.
But certainly, interesting part of the world. The coltan is still being mined out, and the batteries are still being created.
Yeah, they're still being exploited for sure over there. I mean, I watched a few documentaries on it, and then you'll have like Tesla or Apple saying like, oh, we have responsible and sustainable sources of our lithium and our coltan and cobalt. And they'll say, so then those will get traced back. They try to trace those back, and it will go to like a factory in China, but they can't. And the Chinese company will say they're sourcing it responsibly, but nobody's tracing where the Chinese companies mine, if that makes sense. So there's
no traceability.
They're creating like a little disconnect. So like the Western company says, everything's responsible just because the Chinese taking the Chinese company's word for it.
It's not fair trade, is it?
Yeah. So it's just like basically like, oh, we're just, because it's like this boat's telling me that they're dolphin safe or whatever, this boat, and we're just we're not gonna go out and find out if they are or not. We're just gonna take their word for it because they've got the dolphin safe sticker. So it's kind of the same with the coltan and the cobalt.
Yeah.
Like, oh, this Chinese company somehow managed to attain the sustainability sticker. Maybe they paid off somebody, or who knows how they got the sustainability sticker. But it's like once they get the sticker, once they get that certification, it's like we're good to go, and we don't everything else after that point. I've even seen some things. What was it? Where I heard some. I'm not sure where I saw this or read it or watched it, but a lot of the textile factories in India or Pakistan, for instance, whenever the inspectors from like Nike or one of these big clothing or apparel brands will go there, they like on the day that they come there, they'll make sure everything looks great, everything's perfect, everything's fine. Look, everyone's happy, everyone's working normal hours. So it's like when the audit happens, everything's good. Then they get the certification. And obviously, but as soon as the auditor or the regulator leaves, then just goes back to business as usual, the exploitation of the workers and things like that. So
you've got things like Rainforest Alliance, haven't you, for coffee? But I don't know if we've ever seen any Chinese corporations coming in and saying that they've got Rainforest Alliance for mining out Cooltown, and people just going out there with like spoons or small diggers to crack rocks all day. I'd be interested to see if they were trying to say that. But the point is about like China and the West, including the United States, hold on these types of resource mineral rich areas are like Africa, is that they're trying to maintain them as this periphery region, whilst the core areas of capitalism, whether that's New York or London or Paris or Tokyo, maintains a stranglehold through the listing of corporations on their respective stock exchanges, and maintains economic power over those periphery regions by ensuring that they don't necessarily industrialize their production systems, and so that they don't have that added value on those mined resources, don't turn them into electronics or cars or some other kind of interesting missile system, so that they maintain them as in a development of underdevelopment, so they're always on the frontier. So these types of commodity frontiers like the Congo always stay poor, because over the years we've made sure they destabilized. So at the moment, Congo is continuously destabilized by Rwanda, and Kagame, who's the dictator of Rwanda, he's been keeping the MH25 militia in the area around Goma in the northeast of the Congo, and they're trying to maintain their foothold on the resources there. But the West doesn't give a fuck about the Rwandans perpetuating the civil war. Why? Because they want to keep the prices low for all the minerals coming out.
Yeah.
People like Rio Tinto and the other mining corporations that do very nicely out of it.
Yeah, if you keep the area disenfranchised, then you can. You have to keep. The thing is, if education, they say knowledge is power, but it's really true. If people start getting educated and know what something's worth, know what a resource is worth, know what the value actually is, then all of a sudden, it's a lot harder to rip people off, or get people to work for that much. But the thing is, if you create a desperate situation, then people are just forced to accept whatever they can get, which is really sad and unfortunate. But who was I speaking to the other day? I think I was speaking to a guy from somewhere in West Africa, and he was saying, because I was telling him how I don't think these countries really truly got independence, because once the banking system was implemented into their country, once the European banking system had been imposed, then these countries, no matter how much physical independence they could attain, they were then enslaved through the financial system and the European banking system or the American banking system. So then he actually said to me, he said, the Western Africa, all of the old French colonies in West Africa, their economy is under the CFA. I think, don't quote me on that, but it's called the CFA. It's like it's like a French area.
Yeah,
and all of the previous French colonies, their currency is somehow tied to the euro or the French National Reserve.
That's
is
right.
tied to
French
all of
National Reserve. It's tied to their kind of banking.
Yeah, so they can't really escape. Like they basically are tied, like intrinsically linked to the French economy. So whether that's, and I think there's been some criticism about that because they can't actually escape. If basically France can kind of exercise financial control and power over this region in whatever way it kind of wants, from what I understand. And those countries may never actually be able to, they can't really control their own destiny.
It keeps that kind of development of underdevelopment I was just talking about. And Niger recently had a uprising against that, and said they wanted to leave the CFA region, the Franc area, and partly because of uranium resources. So it's like another classic commodity frontier where the French want all the uranium because they're like 90% nuclear powered, and so they want to keep nice cheap uraniums coming out of the Niger desert. So they're quite happy for it to be stabilized and maintained in that region, but they've been waking up to the fact that if they can control their own financial destiny, their own financial policy, then they've got a better chance of creating their own autonomy. Burkina Faso, I think, is also trying to get out of that as well. But it still includes places like Côte d'Ivoire, Ivory Coast, Mauritania, Togo, Benin, and I believe Algeria may have already left. I'm not 100% sure about Algeria. But there's a lot of West African countries which are in that French region. That's right.
Yeah.
It's an interesting one.
Well, if you look at it, if you kind of look, I like to use, when I think about these types of things, obviously I like to think of them in a sometimes a metaphorical type way, or draw a comparison. But if you look at like just people in general, so it's I've lived in the past with people that had issues mentally or emotionally. And even in my family, I have people that have physical ailments or illnesses.
Don't we all, right?
Yeah. But it's so much more beneficial when everyone is healthy. Each individual is healthy. It's so much, if everyone can take care of themselves to the best of their ability and each person is healthy, then it doesn't cripple the people around them. So if you have a family member or a friend who's got an issue, whatever that may be, and they're constantly needing assistance and requiring extra resources from you, and because they're not able to be self-sufficient because of their issues or their problems, it's not optimal for anybody. And if I try to draw that comparison to like countries, imagine if you have this massive immigration crisis that's always in the news, and imagine if each country was a good place to live. You wouldn't have this. A lot of people criticize the migrants because
trans-Saharan migration across the Mediterranean or wherever else.
Yeah, well, they're criticized. A lot of people say, "Oh, they're economic migrants." Well, you can't blame them if their country is being artificially suppressed and they want a better life. Then, but the solution to that is like, well, let's make it so each country is an okay, decent place to live, and then you wouldn't have people, flooding over borders, and then that's the thing. So what's going to happen is people are saying, oh, they're importing the third world, and the UK is going down, the quality is going down, and well, it's the same thing. It's like if you have a friend or a family member who's sick, like your quality of life is going to go down.
Exactly.
Because
or take for example Uncle Togo. Because Uncle Togo can never get laid and he's hungry. He's obviously more unhappy, so he thinks, right, I'm gonna go have a little bit of a walkabout. I'm gonna go wandering. So I suppose that's the analogy. Thinking about my Uncle Togo, who's also a country, metaphorically speaking, or Auntie Nicaragua or cousin Honduras. If NAFTA, for example, in North America, comparatively with the African region, if NAFTA or the Latin American countries are kind of maintained in a kind of corporate relationship with the United States, where they are maintained as good places for resource exploitation, and the industrial base is being kind of undermined through preferential trade agreements for the United States. Then, of course, these people will want to go to the richer part of NAFTA in that area, but you need to get the United States supporting the economic development of those countries so that they do want to stay in their local countries, so that Auntie Nicaragua is feeling kind of relaxed and chilled out, you know?
Yeah. Well, also, we have a friend who actually just moved to El Salvador. His name is Ruben. He actually was he was on a podcast. He came here to do a podcast, but the sound we did a 3-hour podcast, but the sound glitched and we had to scrap it because it was just us talking with no sound.
I wonder how Ruben's getting on. I hear he's making all sorts of things out of bamboo.
Yeah. So Ruben, he's our friend. He's in Scotland, and he kind of he is convinced World War III is going to start, which may well do. Hopefully it doesn't. But he was just like, I'm getting out of here before I want to go start like a self-sufficient type project or go just see if it's something I'd like to get into in El Salvador. I've wanted to do that too. I want to go out in the countryside and start growing stuff and just getting back to our kind of roots of being able to provide for ourselves and not being dependent on a system where you're having to like extract and get food. It'd be nice to be self-sufficient. But anyway, so he's gone to El Salvador. He was convinced that El Salvador has turned it around. They had that new prime minister or president. Yeah. Bacali. Is it Bacali or something?
I think it's Bacali, yeah. El Salvador, they got the Bitcoin there now. I don't know how well it's working for the pricing.
Yeah, apparently they've like gotten rid of all their crime but he seems to be he hasn't given like a full critique yet. He sent me like a little video of him just going around seeing the touristy spots. But we'll have to get him. Maybe we'll do like a video call with him.
No, we get. I'm looking forward to seeing how he's getting on and seeing who he's meeting. He's the people on the streets because he speaks good Spanish.
Yeah, he is Spanish. I mean, I guess his mom or his dad's Spanish, so he speaks fluent
Spanish. His dad is Spanish. Yeah, I can see that. I can see that now. He's got a very Scottish dour way. Seems to hate the world and people's, not necessarily the whole world. Got a deep, bitter perspective of people's potential for escaping their inner demiurge, if you will.
Well, it's easy
they're in darkness.
I think Aberdeen's a easy place to get trapped in that type of mindset. We live in Aberdeen, Scotland, for anyone who doesn't know, and it's an interesting place. And Jeremy's actually a professor at the University of Aberdeen. So he's a professor there for his human geography courses. But Aberdeen, it's a very interesting place. There's a lot of very old industry here. I think the Port of Aberdeen is the oldest registered company in the UK. And you've had in the 70s and 80s, there was an oil boom here, offshore oil. And you had a bunch of big American companies like Shell and other NOV, whatever, Chevron, who knows. But everyone and their brother came here for the oil boom. Yeah. And it was very prosperous in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s. And then since the sustainability movement and the kind of the eco movement, they say that the oil fields are kind of shutting down. I'm sure they are to some extent, but there's definitely a lot of oil related industry still going on. Maybe I'm sure there's a lot of kind of greenwashing of that they're shutting it down, but it's kind of going on under the radar. Some of the oil.
They're trying to keep it going, aren't they? Certainly. Yeah. With the Jackdaw campaign and the Rosebank campaigns, which is the next big oil fields that they want to open up. But the UK government, since the Labour transition, is saying that these can now be legally challenged so that we don't reopen the next wave of oil fields. But it's big controversy here in Aberdeen because something like 35,000 people work in the oil industry. It's the oil capital of Europe, the energy capital of Europe. And certainly there's a lot of passion for keeping that industry going. But some people are trying to get into renewables with mixed results. Not everybody can switch over. and that means that some of the skills could be transferable, whether that's doing engineering or mechanics or just logistics. If you just or even human resources, maybe these people could transfer over, but not everybody can adjust, and it hitting people hard. How are we going to get these? Like, for example, how would you feel, Ray, if you were a kind of oil mechanic, and you've been told that you can't get Rosebank opened up for your oil consultancy? What do you think about that?
Yeah, you'd be upset, wouldn't you? I mean, and yeah, I mean, everybody. That's the thing. Everyone has, once you create like a dependency on an industry, for a massive amount of people, it's going to be very difficult to like convince those people that it's, you know, like you said, it's going to be hard for them to cross over and transfer those skills. But yeah, I mean, this town still has a big dependency on the oil industry, obviously. And
we're in search of the just transition, the democratic transition. But what does that mean?
Yeah. So, but what's happened is that the local sentiment kind of, there's a lot of local sentiment to keep the fields open, but then people that are less effective, you know, the voters that nationally might not realize the importance or of how important that industry is locally. So you're getting people voting against keeping them open. So you have like a national kind of eco shift, but then you have like a local kind of desperation to cling on to this industry, which is totally understandable. You know, you feel for, even me. I mean, I'm a waiter, but they're starting to introduce you can order and pay on the app. On the app.
Oh, the technology's definitely
so they're starting to, so they're taking away the whole. They're basically trying to eliminate my job with an app, and so I'm there doing all the work still. I'm there delivering the food, serving the food, taking their order. I guess some of them can order on the app, but then at the end they just kind of duck the payment, and they'll just like
the tip.
They'll just like pay on the app and get out of there.
Yeah.
And you have no idea what they're tipping or what you know. It's like there's no opportunity for you to kind of
bring back cash.
Well, some people, you get a mixture. Going back to Ruben dislike or like having his sentiment in Aberdeen. There's like a very sharp divide in Aberdeen. You get there's definitely like an upper class. Like if you just drive a little bit outside west, there's like a very educated, kind, warm kind of people that are obviously very privileged. They've lived quite a privileged lifestyle. And then I live in the city. I live on one of the kind of craziest streets in Aberdeen called George Street. I have an Instagram.
There's a crack pipe on every corner.
I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't go that far. There was a toilet. Someone just left a toilet on the corner here, and then someone smashed it. Like it was a porcelain toilet, and it was like there, and it was it was kind of cool. It was almost like an art piece. And then one day somebody just came there and smashed it, and it was just porcelain all over the road. Yeah. But I have an Instagram channel called The George Street Dream. Check it out.
How does that link back to Ruben? Because he's living quite an interesting adventure.
So linking back to Ruben.
Yeah.
I was gonna say there's like a undertone of desperation in Aberdeen. There's definitely like a subgroup of like if you walk the streets, there's a very divided, almost like a class system here, and so you have people that are quite desperate, and on the street you have quite a lot of homeless people on the street here. But then you also have like some of the and then you have the working class normal, and you have the upper class, which are very they seem
entwined with the oil.
Yeah, so obviously the more desperate people are, and I've worked in Aberdeen quite a lot. I haven't had that much I'm not going to go too much in detail, but I haven't had that much success in terms of being an employee in Aberdeen. There is like this weird stranglehold of industry here. There's like a strangle, like when I work at the restaurants and stuff like that.
Asphyxiation.
Yeah. You know, your boss, all the bosses are like trained to be very, I guess like almost dominating and I'm like singling out anybody, but they're very like tight. You know, if you're just like a working class person here, especially like I guess in the fields I've worked in, there's like a very tight kind of restrictive feeling as an employee.
Right.
And
it's very more formalized, perhaps.
I don't know. I wouldn't even say formal. It's just kind of like it's like a stranglehold on the working class, the average working class person.
This Aberdonian oil bourgeoisie.
Possibly. I don't know what it is, but it's and you know, it's everywhere, I guess. Even in London, I felt the same thing. It's just like I guess there's like a stranglehold on the working class, like to keep you thinking that, same as what we were talking about education with the African countries, you know, like if they don't know what they're worth, they don't know what they're worth. They don't know what the value of the resources are. They can't really advocate for themselves or do anything about it. Or even if they do know what they're worth, they can't do anything about it because they don't have the resources to change it. But for instance, I know, I mean, some nights I'll bring in like $1,500, $2,000 for the restaurant. I can see that. Yeah. Like I'll bring in like $2,000 or whatever on the biggest days. Or I think last night I brought in like 1,200 or something just by myself. That's in payments. I know they have rents and stuff to pay, and it's not easy to run business. My dad has owned businesses, and you know, to the average worker, it looks like the company's making a lot of money, and they probably are still making money. But at the end of the day, you have costs, you have rent, you have to pay labor, you have to do all that thing.
But so how do we overcome the class exploitation in the Scottish Northeast?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough. I mean, look, the
new
thing
forms
is,
of political and social organisation, cooperatives, holocracies, perhaps.
Well, a lot of it's just. I think a lot of it. I wouldn't even mind. I don't mind how much money I'm making. Actually, like I think I'm getting compensated fairly. I think most people would actually say that they're getting compensated fairly for their work in terms of what they can buy with their money, but it's like how they're treated, you know, like you can still like, if a big thing is like environment and the culture of the working force. Like if we can just, I think if you like to go to work and want to go to work because you don't have people bothering you or messing with you, or just letting you kind of do your job, it's enjoyable. Like I like to work. I'm not lazy. I like to go to work. I like it's kind of fulfilling. I know I did my work for the day. I get my money, go buy my groceries. But if we can just implement a better working culture where we treat the working class like, hey, look, if you can improve your, and then also
it reminds me of this concept of the labour theory of value by Marx. It's starting to sound like a Marxist, Ray. What's going wrong with you?
Really? No. But here's another thing. And also, competence is not rewarded. What I've realized working in the UK, sorry, I'm cutting you off, but working in the UK, what I've realized, I'm 33 now. I've been working pretty much most of my adult life. I've just realized, and I wouldn't say I don't have like a really specific skill set. My main skill set is audio and visual and music. That's what I invest most of my spare time into. But what I've realized is that, you know, competence is not rewarded. Loyalty is what is rewarded in our world today, or in the UK workforce. So I've worked in countless restaurants. You can have a manager or a senior waiters or assistant managers who you might be 1,000 times more confident, even head office or higher level people, you could be more competent than them. But you're not going to be, your efforts will never be rewarded unless you give loyalty, like show that you're loyal to that company. You'll never leave them. You're never going to steal the intellectual property. And only once they
self-identify with that company, like
once you're like owned by them, you have to like sell your soul to that company. Then you'll get the benefits of. Then they'll let you reap some more benefits of like being nicer to you and just treating you with some like basic human dignity.
I am EasyJet.
Yeah, you have to
for
like,
example.
And then even still, once you're done, or once if anything small happens for any reason to get rid of you, even if after the loyalty, the company will still prioritize its own self-serving purposes and get rid of you like in a heartbeat and hire some new person even after. But I think that's a global thing. Basically, business is business. I get it, but you know, competence, especially in government, you know. We need to have competent leaders, competent people, And we should definitely not have, in business, I understand it. Loyalty in business, okay, that's one thing. But in terms of government, we should have the most competent people doing things, not
a meritocracy of sorts.
Exactly, not loyalists. So that's my biggest issue I have with government. It's like, okay, do we actually have the proper experts in the positions, or are we just, is it like friends hiring friends and things like that? Or is it just loyal? Oh, this person's, because they worked for 20 years in this position, they're the ones that first in line for the promotion. But there might be some smart kid who's like 23 with like amazing ideas and sees things with like a totally revolutionary vision and can change things for the better. But he'll have to go sell his soul to get that government position, stay there for 20, 30 years, and then maybe he'll have a chance to change something. But by the time he gets to that, by the time he spent 30 years in the government, the system has changed him, and so he won't even want to change anything after that point, you know? So it's like
it's a self-selecting circle of sycophants, sycophantic self-selecting circle where you have people like, for example, in the Conservative Party who come in and say like, oh, I'm David Cameron, I'm going to have somebody who thinks in exactly the same way as I do. Good old chap, let's bring him in or her in. And it's quite entertaining to kind of see that cycle continuing. That's why you only get certain types of people coming into power. Occasionally you have certain shifts, like to the centre left you've got Labour, and arguably people like Keir Starmer is taking a different paradigm, focusing on kind of human rights and state-directed development. But the majority of British history has been based on the Conservative hegemony of power, and they've always been self-selecting, aristocratic or similar-minded people who reproduce that kind of fetishization of the free market. And that continues today. And that's why we need to find ways to have not only a more democratic system, but to escape the stranglehold of the bankocracy, the international banks that can secretly or not so secretly pull the strings behind the scenes of our economy and push the buttons.
Yeah.
And a big part of that conversation, perhaps, Ray, is the national debt. I saw that there's been some debate in the United States about the national debt, but certainly it's something which is interesting to me because there's a few. What's interesting about the politics in the United States, there is some critical relationship with things like the Federal Reserve, and which prints US dollars. And in Britain we have the Bank of England. So the Bank of England started the national debt back in 1492 or something similar, where you had the Battle of Beachy Head, and the French routed the Royal Navy. So King Charles II said, or whoever it was, let's get a huge navy built up. So it's the banks have been behind the scenes for a really long time, controlling policy, controlling the direction of interests. And we need to escape the banks. We need to escape that debt relationship.
In the banks, I mean, the banks are always prioritizing money, I imagine, or resources. Like the bank's always going to do, or I mean, is the bank's interest in the best interest of society, or is it only serving a few? That's the question. I mean, it's obviously better than it was in the past. I'm sure the banks in the past.
It's definitely improved. Sure.
Yeah. It's definitely improved, but they're still always kind of winning, you know, like, so the interest rate on that you have to pay the bank for a loan is always going to be higher than the interest rate they'll give you on your money. You know, that's another thing. It's like, so that
they always want to keep you as an individual or as a community or as a local council in debt so that they can have power over you.
Yeah. So, I mean, and yeah, there's a lot of
the national debt.
Yeah. And there's a lot of, you know, before I say this, I'm probably about 30 or 40% Jewish, but there's a lot of talks online and things like that about how like the financial system is kind of owned by like a lot of Jewish individuals.
Yeah.
Who they're obviously very smart with financial concerns or matters, you know. And I'm okay. I'm pretty good financially, but it is with the great power of like inherited knowledge from your parents about financial matters and how to basically maximize financial gain. So with that, a lot of, your parents teach you that, and seems as that, and then also there's an aspect of inherent intelligence or taught intelligence from a young age of how to deal with finances. But yeah, it seems as though the Jewish population, for whatever reason, is very good with money.
Some of them are.
Some of them, not all of them.
Yeah.
You can't generalize, but if you look at the concentration of wealth of like high level bankers or whatever, I'm sure quite a lot of them are Jewish.
Some of them are, and it links back to the medieval period, where in Europe, because of the Catholicism, the rules of Catholicism and usury, Christians weren't allowed to lend money.
Usury. Is it usury or usury?
Well, you can pronounce it either
way.
way.
Oh, yeah. So basically interest, right? That's interest. Usury is like basically charging interest on a loan or something, right?
Yes. And certainly making kind of profit from sort of money lending, fiat currency, where the kind of is a part of that as well, where you don't have a currency tied to a commodity like gold. But yet usury is like when banks make money through interest. So yeah, Jewish people have been involved in that, but certainly not just Jewish people, as well, lots of Christian people as well, and the majority have been probably Christian, because we switched from Catholic to Protestantism after William of Orange came over in like the 16th century. And
I thought it was after King Henry VIII. Didn't he switch it from Catholicism?
That was another thing. That is true actually. Yeah, you're right. The Reformation was when King Henry VIII came over, and then they later on had King William of Orange, because it went from Protestant and then it went to Catholicism again with Mary Queen of Scots, and it went back to William of Orange.
Okay, I didn't know that. I just know the basic history that
But you're right.
He wanted a divorce, and then he switched over to the Church of England instead of
that is exactly right.
Catholic Church.
But the point, well, I suppose the point I was making was later on it went Catholic again, and then it went to with King James Scotland, I think. And then it went, and they invited this Dutch guy in, William of Orange, and then that was a kind of period of the evolution of the stock market, and the financial capital exploded around the world with the British Empire. So we went to North America and took over the United States. Places like, for example, the New England Company was quite interesting, because it was only oxygenated by the fact you had all these investors saying to we're going to get a stock in the New England Company, or some other place in like Canada or somewhere, Australia.
So it's kind of like the British implemented the system and the Jews mastered it.
Well, it's not. I wouldn't say that. I think the Jews, their role is overstated in the kind of financial industry.
Okay.
In the sense that a lot of these organisations of the kind of the most important banks over the years, some of them were Jewish, but not all of them were. Like Sigmund Warburg was potentially I'm not 100% sure if he was just German or if he was Jewish as well, but they were creating the first system of allowing a company to offshore their profits through having allowing a company to register its operations in one place whilst its activities were going on elsewhere. So, for example, the activities were going on in Egypt, but the headquarters is in London. So they kind of split where the registration of the business and the headquarters are and the operations, and then where it was taxed. So it could be like taxed in somewhere else altogether, where there's a low tax regime. And then that created this kind of offshore environment, the tax haven environment. So to check if Sigmund Warburg was Jewish or not, I'm not sure if he was just German, but he came over, and that was the point. Is it was working with a lot of these Christian people in the London area, in the City of London Corporation, who were creating these new mechanisms, working with lawyers as well in the Bermuda, in the British Virgin Islands, in the Cayman Islands. Anyway, so that was why it was much more successful than the Spanish Empire, because they didn't really have that type of investment in the imperial activities. So yeah, they did have a role, but it's exaggerated. Perhaps.
It's exaggerated, yeah. I got kicked out. Jeremy invited me to this thing called the Radical Cafe, which is like where a group. It's like a little underground kind of like building, and a bunch of people meet there, kind of like hippies, and they talk about I guess like supposed radical ideas. And I went there on my first day. I got some donuts, and I was like, I'm pretty sure the British, and there's a British Jewish media alliance that's basically dominating the Western media hemisphere. And this dude, it was right around whenever the Palestinian and Israel, I think it was right around October 7th, those events.
Yeah.
And this dude, but it was crazy because they were about to go on a pro-Palestinian march that day. They all had like their Palestinian flags. And I was like, yeah, I said, I think there's like a British Jewish media alliance kind of like stranglehold on the Western world. And this dude was like, if you say one more thing, you're getting kicked out and banned forever. He's like, my wife is Jewish and blah, blah. I was like, well, I'm Jewish. I was like, I'm like 30% Jewish. And I was like, I thought this was like the Radical Cafe. And they're like, no, that type of rhetoric is what led to like the Holocaust and everything. And I was like, I'm Jewish. I was like, I don't want to die. I don't want to get...
You're not really that Jewish, are you?
Well, I'm not like a practicing. I wouldn't say I practice the religion, but my mother is like 50% Ashkenazi Jew. My dad's like 30% Ashkenazi and like 20% Sephardic Jew.
Yeah,
mixed in with some Dutch and some other Dutch and Scandinavian, and mixed in with some.
How often do you go to the synagogue, Ray?
Every day.
in your imagination, in your dreams, mate.
No, but I mean, I can recognize, like, I think, well, the thing is, Judaism is a religion, but it's also a race, I think. I don't know for sure, but I think it's all, like, something, like, so, like, Islam is not a race, for instance. It's a religion, because you get, like, Indonesia, like, they have a massive Islamic population.
Well, I'll tell you why that is.
But Judaism,
they practice endogamy, so you have to, so they kind of breed within that population, and they don't convert people to Judaism. They don't proselytize.
You can,
but it's different to like Christianity or Islam, where they go actively trying to get people to become Muslims or Christians.
Judaism is normally like a rich Jewish guy who has to convert his like hot wife, gold digger wife, to be a. He's like, look, you want to be with me because of my money? You got to convert to Judaism and. Because the mother has to be Jewish.
Pretend I'm the rabbi.
Yeah.
Come to me. You want to be a Jewish?
Don't suck my baby's foreskin, please.
Well, I certainly won't be doing that. But all right, pretend I'm a rabbi. You try and you've just landed in Tel Aviv. I'm the rabbi. You want to become a Jew? God, ask me if you.
Yeah. Okay. I'm here on my birthright. I want to become a Jew.
No.
Can you convince me how I should become Jewish, or like why?
If you're not Jewish, you can't be Jewish.
Okay, so it's an exclusive
Unless you say
club.
It 3 times, and then they say like maybe
3 times.
Yeah.
I want to be a Jew. I want to be a Jew. I want to be a Jew. But so
you have to keep coming back.
So they don't have like missionaries and stuff going to Africa like promoting Judaism. It's
so
like
it's quite different to Christianity or to Islam.
But I could be a Jew if I really if I kind of dug into my if I really identified with my Jewish side and I really tried to kind of awaken my inner Jew, that I could basically become a Jew.
You could do, if you
because I have the blood. Because I have
some blood. Maybe you want to go and learn some lines of Deuteronomy, or you could do the Torah dance.
Yeah.
However that goes.
But I I got invited to like a birthright thing. You know, like I think if you have at least an 8th Jewish blood, you can go. Israel will pay for you to come there for like a 10 or 15 day thing and take you around, and you can fire some AK-47s across the wall.
I'll be up for that. Yeah.
Do some Krav Maga with some of their hot Jewish soldier chicks.
I think that sounds like a good winter break.
I think I'm too old now. I think you have to be under the age of like 31 or 33. But yeah, I always thought, I was like, maybe I should go do that free birthright trip. But going back to the UK government, before I was saying how I think the smartest people should be in government, and like instead of the
meritocracy.
It should be meritocracy instead of loyalty. This isn't exactly in line with that, but it's something else I'd like to touch on. Like the UK government, it almost feels like it's not. It's the last few. I mean, you elect the party here, and the party elects the leader of that party. So it's not like the United States, where you directly elect your leader. So like the UK government, for instance,
that's the king. Yeah.
Most of the time, the prime minister here is not on the docket for the vote. So they'll vote for the party. Who do you want? Do you want the Republicans or the Democrats? Then they'll vote that party in, and then like 10 days later, the leader of that party can change. That's happened a few times. So. Like the person that you're voting, you think you're voting for this party, and then you think you're getting a leader, and then 10 days later he might get like a vote of no, or she might get a vote of no confidence, and they'll get like swapped out with a different leader. So it's like they'll pull a fast one on the public. So the public thinks they're getting kind of they know they're getting the party. They know which party they're voting for, but they don't know which leader they're voting for necessarily. It could change at any time, really. And then that brings me to my other point. It's like recently I kind of just feel like UK politics is super fake, because I was reading in the there's a new leader of the Conservative Party. Now the UK Conservative Party the UK Conservative following or constituents, let's say, I wouldn't say that they're like their biggest one of their biggest kind of like voting points is anti-immigration. They're borderline kind of racist rhetoric. The left will say the left will say like the right's kind of values and policies are like borderline racist. That's like a big kind of attack point from the left onto the right. So now the right-wing party, the Tories here, their new leader of their political party is a African woman. Which I just find
Nigerian, yeah.
She's Nigerian, which I mean I have no problem with, but it's hard for me to believe that Nigerian woman is who the constituents of the right-wing party want as their leader, considering that most of the constituents are like borderline racist. So it's like where's
the democracy in that?
Yeah, well, it's like there's no way that the right, like they're trying to just confuse the right-wing voters. They're just like, look, you think you're right wing, but like the leader that you're voting for is a black woman, and it's like, so okay. If the Labour Party's leader is a black woman, I get it, because that's like in line with what
aggressive politics.
Yeah, because the right wing party is more nationalist. They're more like Britain first.
They want to go back to the medieval era, the feudal system.
I don't know, but they're just kind of like
system.
Britain first. We want
like
Britain.
Trump and Musk, classic oligarchs. Yeah.
Well, they just want Britain to be represented by Britain. They want Britain to kind of maintain its identity, I guess you could say. Like it's a more nationalist type movement. So anyway,
make Britain great again and bring it back to World War II.
Well, I don't know.
Clone Churchill and invade the Jerrys.
Yeah. Anyway, I just wanted to touch on that point. It's like there's no way in hell that, in my opinion, that a Nigerian woman was organically selected as the leader of the right-wing party here. Yeah. It's obviously just orchestrated or manipulated in some way. There's no way that all the right-wing people
what happens with the Conservative Party when they vote in a new leader? It goes to the Conservative Party membership to vote on it. And they usually... What they had this time and what they normally have is like a race between like 8 candidates, and each round they whittle them down one after the other. And I'm not sure if Kemi Badenoch, who's the new leader, is necessarily representative of the Conservatives. But the funny thing about the Conservatives are differently perhaps quite different to the Republicans in the United States, in the sense that they are a kind of, at least in their imaginations, they are a broad church political party, and some of them will say that there is a kind of almost a left-wing part of the party as well.
Really?
So they try to... One nation conservatism is about trying to kind of improve social justice. Arguably, certain people from the left of the party want that, but it's not necessarily what actually happens. It's a kind of small voice in that political party, and most of the time the kind of oligarchies, the big corporations, the big financial interests, the aristocratic families dominate it.
Mm.
And so, what's going to happen with Kami Badenoch is they've put her in because she's a scrapper. She likes getting into arguments and just kind of talking shit.
I've never even heard her speak. I don't know any of her policies. I know nothing about her. I'm not massively into politics here. I don't think I've voted yet. But yeah, I just noticed that, and I was like, that seems like a bit of a disconnect from the like public, just kind of like the public, what's the word? Narrative at the moment. But I mean, their last leader, the last leader was Rishi Sunak, who was actually the prime minister, and he was he
Indian heritage?
Indian? Was he Sikh or was he Hindu?
I think he might have been Hindu.
Hindu. So he was of Indian heritage. So I guess there's like, I mean, and he was quite fiscally conservative, I think. So I mean, I guess there's different aspects.
He was a tech bro.
Was he? Yeah. So he's. I mean, there's different.
He thought he was anyway.
He thought he was. There's different aspects of the, I guess, conservative party. Like, I guess it's very highly possible that somebody British genetic heritage is very financially conservative and can basically deliver on the financial values that the people are looking for. But definitely, yeah, like in terms of the identity politics, like it doesn't really make sense with just kind of like the narrative of the right wing.
It's not an analog of the right wing in a kind of exact way, because what they are really a party of is neoliberalism, which is a political philosophy. Neoliberalism has been the hegemonic form of economic dominant strain of thinking, which is about creating free markets and ensuring that corporations have got free trade and they can go around the world and do as they please, as long as that it enriches the stock market and enriches economic growth. So the Conservatives are the party of neoliberalism, and that builds on liberalism ultimately from the kind of 18th century and the Victorian, like the African Corporation or the African company, which went out to West Africa and Nigeria and started trading palm oil in the Niger Delta, and then they were trading slaves, and then they're trading a mixture of the two, and then they went into kind of petrochemical oil in the Niger Delta with Shell, for example, today, and they've made a huge ecological collapse of the Niger Delta. But it's not an analogue of the Republicans and the Democrats in the United States in that sense. But yeah, it's interesting to compare the two systems, but they're not exactly the same.
Yeah, very different. But so I mean, I guess I would like to also talk about, so you've done a lot, besides your teaching at the University of Aberdeen, you're doing, you're a professor, is that correct? You're
a research fellow, teaching fellow.
Research fellow.
So teaching fellow, depending on what part of the week.
You teach quite a few classes a week.
Less this semester, but last semester more, yeah.
Okay, but are you doing some more research now this semester, or?
Yeah.
I know you were, when I first met Jeremy, we met through one day he just showed up at the tennis club and we just started playing. And
so I started teaching Ray a few tricks, or maybe it was the other way around.
Yeah, no, Jeremy was teaching me some tennis, and basically that was a really nice summer of tennis, actually. The weather was really good last year. The whole summer.
Amazing summers in Aberdeen.
Well, this summer wasn't that good, but the summer of 23 was very nice for tennis. I eventually got banned from that tennis club after winning the doubles championship.
Didn't you throw your shoe into a TV or something? Or was that the other guy?
No. There was a very feisty doubles club championship final, which my partner and I managed to win, but yeah, there were some words and stuff exchanged, and I got banned it's one of the most prestigious and oldest clubs in Scotland, and I got banned from it. I got invited back this year, but I opted out because I didn't want to like sacrifice my body to a season of tennis again. But anyway, long story short, met Jeremy through the tennis club, but he's teaching geography at the University of Aberdeen, but then we took a trip out to
Ben
Nevis, which is the highest mountain in the UK, right?
Yeah.
In all of the UK, not just
all the
Scotland,
UK.
all the UK. So we climbed that with a cool group of guys, and then we did a bit of a tour of the Scottish Highlands. But during that time, Jeremy told me about some of his travels in South America, and he mentioned that before. He went to Chile, and he like basically lived with the Mapuche tribe.
Yeah, the Mapuche people.
Yeah.
And that really kind of radicalized my understanding of the indigenous stateless nations, if you will, because of their understanding of the world.
And can you elaborate on their understanding of the world? Like, what's like a few main points of their understanding of the world?
Well, for example, the Mapuches worship nature in the way that we used to call people, like the Celts, pagans, with like stone circles and the goddess of the moon. The Mapuches still kind of celebrate animism, if you will, where, for example, the Nyens are the local gods that live in the sacred geography, the sacred ecology of the landscape. So I had a really interesting time there when I went, for example, to see the Witri Pantu festival, which is like the solstice. And in one island you have Abelito Wanteao, which is the grandfather island. And the grandfather island continues to reproduce nuan or life energy, life force, into the surrounding ecosystem. So they worship these Nyens as part of their culture. So that was quite interesting to see the kind of, seaweed sacrifice and the celebration of the shortest and longest part of the year, and the sacred biodiversity, and the people as part of their sacred biodiversity is part of that conceptualization in that framework of what they call Asmapu, the mirror to the world. And in part of the Asmapu you have this Itrafil Moyen, which means the sacred biodiversity. And what's unusual about the Mapuches is that the humans are part of the ecosystem. They're not separated like in Christianity with a kind of hierarchy with God and then Jesus below him and then the 7 archangels below them and then man above woman and then dogs don't have souls. Whereas here in a Mapuche framework or Asmapu, the humans are part of the everyday living life. So they have this quite unusual continuing celebration of the land and the sea, the Lafken, which is the sea, and the areas which the Mapu, which is kind of like the land or the tierra, the earth, and so the Mapu is continuously celebrated. I really resonated with me. That was really powerful, seeing these kind of sacred ecology, spiritual celebrations, and it was part of a really interesting resistance movement on the coast and on the land against the mainstream Chilean state, because they never surrendered, the Mapuches, against the Spanish conquistadors, and they were quite successful in many campaigns until at least sort of the 1880s, and they drew up a treaty saying that they would give them their rights to the land, but the Spanish never respected that in Chile in the end. But they live on, and there's over kind of 1 million or 2 million of them. But they continue to fight for the sacred forest, the sacred land, and it's quite interesting. For example, there's this group I met called Coordinadora Arauco Maluco, which is this group which continues to defend the forests, and the Nyen guardian spirits will literally live in the forests by active demolition of the destruction of agroforestry techniques. So they go around, for example,
they like attack like the machines that are cutting down the forest. They'll like guerrilla warfare against the forest,
the agroforestry companies.
Oh wow!
So that was quite interesting to see that and support that, at least verbally. I didn't actually blow up any Chilean tractors myself, but certainly interesting to understand what they were what they were doing. So, for example, during the dictatorship of Pinochet, which started in 1973 till 1990, that was the first real neoliberal experiment, pure neoliberal experiment, where they privatized everything, all of the commons, all of the land, and gave it away to the corporations, which also happened to be a little bit like William the Conqueror, his Pinochet's buddies. Like Angelini was one of those, and a huge tracts of Mapuche forest was given away to the Angelini company, which is quite interesting because they started planting lots of eucalyptus trees in place of the sacred forests. And those eucalyptus trees take up from, as you know, it's an Australian tree, and it takes a huge amount of water resources. So they go on planting these monocultures, not only monocultures of the forest, but monocultures of the mind, because there's this commodification of the forest kind of completely ignores the kind of spiritual values of the Mapuches, but also this these other intrinsic values of nature, which mainstream economics ignores, as well as the relational values of people's kinship with the land, with the forest, where some people see that the trees are kind of part of their community, part of their family. And as you said with your kind of analogy of Uncle Togo and cousin Nicaragua, for example, if the forest gets sick, then they start to feel sick. They start to feel ill, and they can't realize their needs. They don't feel like their needs are being met because their family's under attack. So that's why they want to reclaim the forest land.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing with, I've never been a massive. I went through a bit of a hippie phase, and I never like fully became a full-on hippie, but my wife.
A hippie though? I'm interested. For you to
so I guess, but like, I've always kind of maintained. I'm always like, well, it's necessary to have some capitalism. It's necessary to have some.
Yeah.
I've kind of fallen in the middle. I've never completely like radicalized one direction or the other. But my wife, I went vegan for about 2 years. When I married my wife, she was vegan. She's been vegan now. She's vegetarian, but she was vegan for about, I think, 10 years when I met her. And before I met her, I was like, oh, vegans are stupid, blah blah blah. And I used to listen to Joe Rogan all the time. Joe Rogan's like, vegans are stupid. But my wife helped me to discover a new way to relate to animals. Like, I never saw animals the same way as before, as when I met my wife. Like, she showed me how like almost every animal kind of has its own personality. If you really take time and you get to know different animals,
the love of a goat. Did you ever love a goat?
Not in the way you might be talking about, but I know down in Cornwall, I don't know what they do down there, but in New Zealand they had sheep lovers. But I guess
here in Texas they really love goats.
Like cow, they like longhorns there. They like
longhorn cows.
But she showed me like a new appreciation for nature, and and I went vegan for 2 years. I stopped when I got COVID. I started eating eggs again, and it was so easy to just fry up an egg when I was so sick I could barely get off my bed. And I needed protein. I was like, I need protein, so I started frying eggs again, and now I'm eating meat again. But I do eat way less meat. I eat probably meat maybe once or twice a week, as opposed to in the past I'd eat it 2-3 times a day.
Yeah.
So, I can appreciate how meat may play an importance in your nutritional profile of like maintaining some of your health, but I think we're at the point in society, especially Western societies, like a total abuse and what's it called? A disproportionate relationship with nature of like extracting animal flesh that we can eat it 3-4 times a day.
Yeah.
And just zero appreciation for nature in that respect. So like in the past, when you went hunting, the animal will be living its life in nature and
free in the forest.
Yeah, it could get killed by a predator. If you just go there and you shoot it, at least it lived its life up until that point,
right? Yeah,
in freedom, and then it just in the moment it's dead. Just like back in the past, I'm sure we would have been subject to predation from other animals too. Like in Africa, maybe a lion just sneaks into your camp and eats you when you're sleeping or something.
Hippos are the worst.
Or hippos, yeah.
Maybe.
So but it was like everyone was fair game. But like you said, now our society, Western cultures especially, they've done a really good job of trying to make us think that we are separate from nature. Like, and I'm an advocate of magic mushrooms. I've taken some magic mushrooms. I'm not to go on the subject too much, but the few times I took magic mushrooms, I realized like I am an animal.
Yeah.
You know, like I'm an animal, and
in the ecosystem.
But everything that you're taught when you're young, and even the Bible tells you that you have dominion over the animals, and I'm sure it says that in the Quran and other religious texts. But it's all like trying to separate humanity from nature and make you feel above it and away from it. And then, I mean, I don't know what the objective or the end game of that is. I don't know why that was implemented in those texts and why we're being taught that, because it's so obvious.
Essentially, it's because in the previous generations before that, you'd have animism where you'd have many gods. You'd have lots of gods in the geography. You'd have the god of the mountain over there. You'd have the god of the island, like with the Mapuches. And then you'd have... It would be more decentralized and more heterodox and...
harder to control, maybe. Harder to implement like a mono thought.
That was the point. Because it was more difficult to control, because different places had power because they had like a temple of Zeus in one area or Jupiter in another. It was much easier. The Romans eventually realized it was much more suitable for their empire, because if they got everybody to follow Christianity, there'd be one God, which would be then controlled by one
set of rules.
One set of rules and one hierarchy focused on the Pope, as an example.
And I think that's where a lot of people say, oh, where did the Illuminati start? Where did the deep state start? All these like conspiracy theories. I think it's quite obvious to me that it all started with the like religion. Religion was the first implementation of like a set of rules that we have to follow, and that separates us from just being animals, and it holds us. And look,
so how do we cast off the shackles of religious thought by creating new types of philosophy?
Well, I think religion served some good purposes for sure. I mean, it's nice that is that my phone ringing or something? Oh, it's nice that
it's all good.
I just felt sorry, I just bumped that. It's very nice that you don't have to worry about just getting like killed or something. Like we have, like religion brought about some really nice sets of rules that are very useful to just living in a peaceful and harmonious society. But with that came a massive... with the good comes the bad. So there's definitely some good things that I think sprouted from that. But it also brought in the mind control, the almost like the occult type nature, the cultish type nature, where people... and then they created different religions too. They had like you have Islam and you have Judaism, and then there's all this fighting because of that. Then you also have the dominion of the animals, the separation from nature. So I think now the thing is why I think they're getting rid of religion now, not getting rid of it, but why it's becoming phased out, I guess.
Less popular, perhaps.
Yeah, my younger brother, I'm not sure if it was his theory or where he heard it from, but he was talking about, he's like, they don't need religion anymore because originally religion was brought in as a form of government. Originally, it was like it was a singular type of government, like the Romans and the Catholic Church.
It was to do with government, yeah, you're right, but it was also a way to kind of explain the mysteries of the world.
Yeah,
that people couldn't understand, and as science evolved, then these kind of deeper mysteries of life became increasingly questioned over periods of history.
So we have science to explain it now. Science can explain these miracles or things that happen, but also in terms of the control element, in the past they needed people to be afraid of a god or afraid of something because of the hell or punishment of purgatory or whatever. They needed people to be afraid of this in order to follow rules and be more governable or controllable. But now that they have basically military dominance, and the government has police presence and control, and they have
it's not just that. It's because they have this capacity now to express values through markets. Everything now is about neoliberalism and the commodification of everything and anything, so that you can you've got this rather synthetic reality where everything, even fresh Cornish air, you can buy that in a bottle, sell that to the tourists. So that's kind of taken over as the state ideology.
You have to buy everything. It's not just part of our world that we can appreciate as a...
Everything's a market. Everything can be commodified. Whereas and that's the kind of ethical framework. But I think a lot of people are kind of creating their own philosophy, their own ways of understanding the world. And it's much more diverse than it used to be. So there's a lot more diversity of opinion. And that means that people have got lots of different subcultures and different interest groups and express themselves in a much more greater variety of ways than they were like 50 years ago or 100 years ago.
Yeah, I just think that the purpose of religion was brought in as a tool of control and a way to basically govern people and also subsequently extract wealth through that control. And now that they have other ways of doing that, that tool is no longer really needed. Like basically the government has surveillance. Everyone has a phone. You can be surveilled. All of your thoughts are they don't need you to basically be afraid of an artificial god and behave, because they can check your mobile anytime, see what you're thinking about. Everything that you're thinking is almost actively being recorded by your phone or CCTV, like video surveillance cameras. So they don't need you to basically be afraid of an artificial god anymore, because they've almost taken the place of God, and they actually can implement the control that they were trying to make you believe they had in the past. It's like it's almost like they actually have everything that they were trying to make you believe they had in the past. Like in the past, they wanted you to be afraid of an artificial god or artificial punishment.
But even the high priests believed in it. I think it's only recently we have secularism, where people don't necessarily believe in anything, and maybe part of it is that there's less violence, there's less war, and there's more surveillance, so that and people aren't so desperate for food or heating that they don't go around killing each other as much.
Yeah. I need to take a quick toilet break. Do you need to go pee?
Yeah,
we'll leave it recording. I'm going to take a quick pee break. Hold that thought. We're talking about religion.
I might go after you.
Yeah, just get a piss.
Yeah, go ahead.
All right, we're back. Just had a quick bathroom break. But we're back online.
Yeah. It's good to be back.
Yeah, feels nice and relieved. Sometimes we had some coffee before the podcast, and anyway. So I guess going off of the topic of, religion, you are currently working on a few, I guess you have as a professor or a teaching fellow, you're involved with research, and you are trying to, since I've known you, you've been telling me about your philosophies that you're trying to develop, ecological confederalism and halocracies. And I know you're working on some books and a lot of projects. Why don't you go into detail about your passions and your projects and your visions for the future and what you're doing?
Thanks, Ray. Yeah, that's a good segue for me. So we're talking about how there's increasing space for alternative political philosophies that have come through, which probably wouldn't have been possible under the Victorian era, although there was to a certain extent, but it didn't really have that kind of space to flourish, potentially, because the crisis wasn't as immediately apparent. And with the convergence, what do I mean by crisis? There's a sort of convergence of ecological and energy and climate crises and political crises at the moment, and that's why me and a few others are kind of developing a conceptualization of ecological confederalism, which is, I suppose, a political philosophy which draws a little bit from anarchism, from ecological economics, from different heterodox sources, but essentially looks to create a way of understanding spatial justice, or how power can flow up from the grassroots communities, so that every community council in Scotland could be empowered to have its own planning, its own decision making, without the top-down central state telling it what to do. So a classic example here in Aberdeen is we have the St Fithick's Park campaign, and that occurs in a place in Aberdeen called Torry. Now Torry is quite interesting because back in the kind of 15th century when it started onwards, it used to be kind of its own independent town, and gradually Torry's been bitten up by the port, the harbour on the north side, where old Torry fishing village was kind of blown up by Shell, and then they built a new port. That was 1971, and they built a new port in 2021. And gradually, the natural environment, the space for the people of Torry to breathe and thrive, has been smashed up and dispossessed. The commons of that part of the city has been debilitated. So why is that? It's because there's a lack of power in Torry as opposed to kind of Aberdeen in terms of decision making. In fact, the Torry district is kind of lumped in with Ferry Hill, which is historically one of the more bourgeois, more prosperous areas. So they don't get to vote and choose how their kind of planning develops. So what's been going on recently is with the Stop or Save St Fithick's Park campaign has been an attempt to stop them industrialising 30% of the park and turning it into an energy transition zone, which is being led by the monstrous demi-overlord of Aberdeen, the mythical under-Satan of the city, and his cable of oil oligarchs.
We're trying to get him on the show. Don't badmouth him too much. We're going to try to get him on.
I can't wait till you come on the show, Ian. Come on the show. We're going to love meeting you. It's going to be great. We'll have tea and Cocoa Pops. Anyway, the ultimate point is with Ian Wood and his oil oligarchies, they control the economy of Aberdeen through Opportunity Northeast and the cable of old boys, and they've gradually...
The cabal, as if anyone, first pronunciation of cable,
yeah,
cabal.
You can say cabal, or maybe that's better. Anyway, the essential point is they are building over the park, and nobody wants that in Torry. So in ecological confederalism, the planning and decision making is participatory, it's deliberative democracy. They get to choose what happens, and each area has their own food sovereignty, their own food security. As well as that, it's a confederation of equal spaces. Each community is in horizontal relationships. So say for example in Scotland, there's probably about 250 community councils. Each one of those community councils is equal. It's in a horizontal relationship with one another. And then where decisions need to be made collectively, the representatives are voted on from below, from the neighbourhood councils, from the grassroots, and then they send the representative, the delegate, to the Meta Council. So that means that the power flows from below instead of being top down. So it goes beyond the conceptualisation of the nation state. That is that there's a centralised unitary authority in the capital city of London, and you don't have this hegemony of the capital. You don't have this capital complex or the capital complex where capitalism is controlled from the capital. Instead, it's highly decentralised, and the flow of power goes up from below.
Mm. And that would require, I imagine... I mean, the thing is, that should be what democracy... That should be a function of democracy, technically. You know, each person is empowered to vote for what they want. But it seems as though there's a disconnect from democracy with the decisions that are being made.
Yeah.
And so this seems like ecological confederalism. You know, how would you? is it a form? It is a form of democracy in a maybe a truer sense.
Like a pure democracy, a direct or deliberative democracy.
Okay.
Some have even called it liquid democracy.
Okay. And is it when you say liquid democracy? In my opinion, a big issue with democracy is like the time in between voting on things. So like, if you vote for a president and you're stuck, maybe you're voting for that president based on the previous events. Then he gets voted in for 4 years. Then there's a new event that comes up, but nobody's allowed to vote on the person who should be in charge of handling that new event.
Yeah.
And then you're stuck with that government for 4 years, or in the UK it's every 5 years, I think the party. So you're stuck with that government's decision making for 5 years on events that you never knew were going to occur, and that you had no idea what the policies of that party were going to be for those events.
Exactly. So that's representative democracy, and we've got to continue evolving the system. In places like Britain and Western Europe, you have representative democracy. Some of it's more democratic than others. For example, Britain and the United States and France, they all have they have United States and Britain have first past the post. In fact, it's a little bit different in the United States. They have a completely different regime, but it's similar in the sense that all the votes get collected by the winner for that state. In Britain, that would be a county or a voting district. So in proportional representation, as a slightly more democratic system, which is found across Western Europe, you get to vote on more than one political party, and so that the Greens or whoever else gets a vote as well. So you have a greater range of political parties coming into power in alliance.
Yeah, it's a bit unfair. Like, say if you win 51% of the vote, it's like the 49% of people are now just like outcast and not heard anymore or something. It's a bit in traditional set, like the party that wins just gets like absolute dominance over the decision making. But I mean, I guess there's still seats in the House. There's still 49% of the House will be the seats in the states will be like Democrats. So there's still that representation there, I guess.
But you end up having hegemony of one or two political parties. Like, for example, the Conservatives and Labour in Britain, and then Republicans and the Democrats in the United States. So that means that those political parties, they don't necessarily think it's in their benefit to democratise it further, to get other parties involved in the mix. But like in Scotland, for example, you do have proportional representation. You've got a whole series of political parties that come in and get involved. Not just the Greens, but you have the Alba Party, for example, Scottish Families Party, the Socialists. There's a greater range of thought. So it's a bit more of a big tent approach, in the sense that you have a wider range of opinion, and that's perhaps more successful because of that broader range of opinion.
What do you think? Talking about ecological confederalism, what can the average person do? Obviously, that system is something that you've been working on, and something that you've are trying to make into a palatable, I guess,
manifesto almost.
Yeah, you're trying to make like a manifesto or something that people can digest and understand. What, I guess, if you could, summarize like the main things that the average person can do to kind of work towards your goals of ecological confederalism, and then also if you have anything to say to like leaders or I guess the government or executive side of things, like what can they do to kind of, I guess, work towards enabling that. Yeah, and then also maybe tell them the benefit. We know the benefits is that there's more representation from the ground up, and that would make happier people and happier society. But I guess if you could try to like summarize, I guess, what the main benefits are, and then what people can do to kind of work towards that, and then anything you'd like to say to like an executive branch, like if you were trying to pitch that to like the government to try and adopt those measures. Maybe if you could do.
So there's three kind of areas there, if I'm hearing you correctly. What is it that people can do to live prefiguratively, that is, living in the future now, to realise the community commons where you have a move towards ecological confederalism? You take, for example, the community council, which is the lowest level of democracy in Scotland, or the parish council in England and Wales. You become more involved in that and see that the assets of the local land are transferred to the community council, so that there is an actual common, so that you can have a community-owned energy system, where that could be a solar farm or a wind turbine, so everybody benefits in terms of cutting their bills, because the community enterprise owns the energy production system, or it owns the land where food is grown to some limited extent. And certainly that becomes a cyclic learning system, where people get to know their local geography better, and they learn their local ecology better, and they learn about their community more, and become more self-sufficient. And also it can lead to a kind of green industrialization, a green industrial revolution, because people will think about the types of products of industry which they can make, not just having it centralized in a factory in China, but making things locally. And where the product life cycle, whether it's making your own shoes or your own car or wind turbine blade, that is increasingly decentralized. And it means that the life cycle of that product, all its inputs and outputs, are understood in terms of the energy, what types of resources are going in, and how also can it be disassembled and recycled afterwards. So that's essentially a couple of the benefits.
So get involved. You say get involved with your local community council. That's one of the first steps that people can do.
Yeah.
Get involved, community council.
Empower it.
Empower it by basically getting involved, because if nobody shows up to these meetings and nobody cares on the ground level, then the community council, its power is also diluted. So get involved with your local community council, and then.
And how does that relate to the executive powers of the central state? Well, I'll tell you one thing. It's immediately obvious in terms of that point, Ray. It's quite interesting. You have to change the law so that community councils control their own assets, can own their own assets. Because at the moment they can't. You can make a community interest company, which can then own land, but you can't. It doesn't necessarily own its own assets, because people are worried that perhaps these councils will then become hegemonized by a couple of players who then control the resource.
So when you say the commons, for instance, like say it's synthetic, so say the community council of Tory, for instance, and why don't they have any decision? So who's the controlling factor? Like you're saying, Ian Wood is trying to kind of industrialize and renovate Synthetics Park. So you said that the fear is that the community councils will be what do you say, hegemonized?
Exactly, hegemonized, that's right.
But isn't that already kind of happening by Ian Wood?
Yeah.
I mean, so what's allowing Ian Wood to hegemonize the decision making in relation to Synthetics Park, as opposed to the community council having its own autonomy?
Well, that's a good point and a good question. And the reason why that's being allowed to happen is because the community councils don't have any power over. They don't have ultimate power over planning and decision making.
Is that the city council that has? Does the city council own that park, or who owns Synthetics Park? I guess.
Well, essentially, it's the city council get the overall say, not the community council.
Okay.
So the community council's against it because that's the Tory community, which is almost historically his own town. But the city council is controlled by Ian Wood and the Opportunity North East cabal, who are a group of certain oil industry corporations that want to create a certain type of development which supports their interests. And it means they get a lot of subsidies from the central government down in Westminster. So they do a lot of subsidy mining For instance, they're claiming there's going to be a new hydrogen economy, which suits the oil industry. Why? Because then they don't need to change the infrastructure. They can just run the hydrogen fuel through the old pipes, which you'd run gas through.
And then they want a subsidy on top of that. Basically, they want like a subsidy on top of not having to do anything.
Yeah, they've already got subsidies.
Yeah. And so you're saying, I mean, basically, there's a lack of, it seems as though there's a lack of transparency in the city councils.
Yeah.
There's some sort of shadow influence going on with city councils, and they're the ones that are the controlling interests of these common areas and parks and the community.
That's right.
And so how do is it written into law that these community councils will never have enough power to influence a city council's decision? Or, I mean, is it if you get enough representation in enough community councils across the city, then that will start changing the minds of the city council? Or is it the city council is just kind of a separate entity, and it's kind of got controlling forces that
it's got a controlling oversight over the lower level councils. So the power flows from the top down, from the city council down to the community council. And above the city council, then you have either the county council or the unitary authority, and then you have the parliament. So it's always flowing down from the parliament. So, for example, and that's very centralised in Edinburgh or in Westminster in London. And so what happens in this particular example is they took a legal challenge against legitimacy over building over this area, which actually is flood prone. If you concrete over it, then it's going to increase flooding, because they recently rehabilitated a kind of wetland and forest area, woodland area. So the area they're going to build over is going to be increasingly flooded. But it does enable the Port of Aberdeen to have a greater laydowns area for chains and other bits of harbour equipment in the new harbour area they've built. So the power continuously flows from the Parliament, Scottish Parliament, down to the City Council, then to the Community Council. But the argument of ecological confederalism is the other way around. It flips power on its head, and communities get to decide on the type of development that they want, that they feel is just.
And that sounds great. I mean, because why is somebody else allowed to build? I think that you shouldn't be allowed to. That it's like, obviously, if you own the land, but he doesn't own that land, Ian Wood, does he?
No.
That's like public land, isn't it?
Public land. So it's cheap. It's cheap because of that.
If you own, but is he trying to buy the land, or is he just trying to influence the council to allow himself to develop it?
He's influenced the council to allow them to have it for free, the energy transition zone.
So it's basically like he's trying to basically capitalize on this public land using some kind of like gray area, basically convincing the council
of the benefits of the economy.
Yeah, and then but he's going to probably is he going to privately profit out of that somehow, I imagine?
Well, the energy transition zone is essentially a private company.
Okay.
So they've given what is public land to a private company.
Yeah.
On the cheap, if not for free. I believe it's free.
Yeah.
But they could have been using an industrial estate just to the south of Torry is a kind of semi-abandoned industrial estate called Alton's, and they could easily do the work there. They could do the developments that they want there. But they wanted to get some cheap land, then they could do subsidy mining, where they invite people like BP or Dolphin, which is another kind of energy company, to create these hypothetical developments like a hydrogen battery storage manufacturer or undersea cables manufacturer to come in, and they make these things in the energy transition zone. But the weird thing is they haven't got one concrete investor to come and make anything in the energy transition zone. In fact, it's all fictional, it's fallacious. It's a fallacy. It's something which enables them to get central government funding or subsidy mining, as Richard Kye calls it, and they get a certain grant, but it doesn't necessarily relate to reality. So it's a kind of triple frustration.
Well, it seems that's not the first time that's happened, though. You know, during COVID, for instance, they had the PPE scandal, personal protective equipment scandal, where basically there were some private interests. I think her Baroness Moan, was it?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, her husband, she got like 30 million or something, 30 million pounds in government money to provide, like a 30 million pound contract to provide probably like a couple million worth of PPE, you know, protective equipment from China. And then half of that equipment wasn't even up to standard or spec. And so it wasn't even usable. And then that money's just been put offshore somewhere, like in the Cayman Islands or Panama or something.
Yeah, exactly.
And then all that equipment's just sitting in a warehouse somewhere, like unusable because it's either expired or wasn't even up to standard. And then all that money is gone. That public money, that's taxpayer money that's just gone into the pockets of some baroness or her husband. And then with absolutely no benefit to society whatsoever.
Exactly.
And it kind of sounds similar to what's happening with Synthetics Park. And it seems like it's a really common theme across the UK. I'm sure it's happening in the USA as well with lobbying.
Happens all around the world.
Yeah, it's lobbying. In the USA, it's called lobbying, which I don't think it should be legal. But specifically in the UK for these examples, it's where they're capitalizing on a public initiative or a government initiative where the government's gonna provide some sort of funding or subsidy or rebate or something for certain activities, even with the migrant crisis right now. So all these like hotels that are basically closing down and reopening as migrant hostels, they're getting like it's something crazy. It's like $1 million a month, or it's I don't remember what it was, but it was like $1 million every two. It was something very lucrative. It's like it's very lucrative, and all you have to do is provide like 1 or 2 meals a day for the migrants, and basically, you know, some basic services, and they're getting millions. And the thing is that those hotels, they would otherwise have to, you know, be dependent on public business, and which is up and down. It's not so consistent. Maybe people go on holiday one week and not the next week, and you have empty rooms. So they're like, oh look, so the government has incentivized, the government has incentivized private hotel owners to, or I'm not sure, maybe private hotel owners are also incentivizing the government to do it because they're eating up the initiative like crazy. So
they're getting paid a lot.
They're getting paid a lot of money. And the thing is, I bet a lot of those hotels are owned by people in government in higher level positions.
Quite possibly. Or
friends of people in government. And so it's like a big, it's like a boys, or it's a club. It's like
an oligarchy of
it's
business.
A club where they're just circling money. They're using public
Revolving
funds.
door.
Yeah, it's like a treasure. The treasure is the taxpayer money. That's where, because you have to pay your taxes. The most fail-safe business is just receiving taxes. It's like, we know we're gonna get taxes, yes or yes. Like we don't have to worry about marketing or anything because they have to pay their taxes.
Yeah.
How can we get a chunk or a share of this tax money that we know is going to be paid, without fail? The taxes get paid. My dad once said, he said, I don't understand how the government's in debt. He said, every single year the government knows they're going to have a surplus of taxes, and every single year they find themselves in debt. And he said, as a private business owner, he's like, every single year I know I'm going to have a deficit because of the tax I have to pay, and every single year I turn a profit. And so it's obvious that the government sector in the USA and the UK is very inefficient, and I don't want to, for lack of better words, corrupt in terms of their usage of public funds, because where's the money? Well,
there's loads of it. It goes into the black holes of tax havens.
Well, exactly. Where's the benefit from the money is what I'm saying, because that's the whole point of taxes, is that it's supposed to benefit the public in some way. It's supposed to be used by the government to benefit everybody in a more equal way.
Yeah. But
and
I
shared.
think there's a couple of things I want to tease out from your point there. One is that you've got this revolving door, as you said, between people who've got in Westminster in the British Parliament. They have more than one job sometimes, so they've got a controlling or interest or a role in a different corporation. Maybe it's a housing developer, or it could be a hotelier. They're in some hotels, maybe, or some other business, and they have a kind of private interest in pushing through a development, and certainly they use that power in the parliament to kind of push that through from the central governmental parliament. So that's kind of in contradiction to the idea of ecological confederalism, because the local community might not want that new housing development to occur. So what's happening right now is you've got the new Labour government coming in, and they say they want to solve the housing crisis. So they want to build loads of new houses. And so what they're thinking of doing is almost forcing through housing development in certain areas. So they build 500 or 1,000 houses on the edge of Aberdeen somewhere, but they're just going to steamroller it through. And there's a bit of a risk in that it won't be a just housing transition, because the way the housing is developed might not be in accordance with the local social sustainability and cultural heritage. Could be like in St Fittick's Park, and that might mean that the people think that they'd rather have a rural relationship with the land. They want to live in the bit on the edge and live in the countryside where it's more relaxed, and so there's this continuous tension between the central government and its overarching economic development objectives and what local communities want. And so that means that there's a continuous tension between the grassroots and top down. Excuse me. So what that is kind of connected to is this economic growthism paradigm, this idea that success of the economy can only be measured by economic growth. Economic growth. And so the country's always trying to push for that, for the economy to get bigger each year. But you can move actually towards steady state economics, where all the inputs and outputs are understood, where people's well-being and livelihoods improve, their education and assets go up, but the economy doesn't necessarily have to grow, because you can publicise the national debt. You can get rid of it. And that means that you're not under the yoke of the central bank or the other banks, which might have a controlling interest in the national debt.
Yeah, I mean, I've always said it's crazy that we have economies that are expected to have unlimited growth with limited resources. Yeah. It's like we have, and they're just using, they'll print money and they'll keep expanding the monetary system to extract more and more and more and more. But yeah, one day there's going to be nothing. I mean, I'm sure it's going to be not in our lifetime, but, it's like they're trying. There's no amount of money you could print. Well, there is probably. They're trying. Eventually, they're going to print enough money to basically extract everything from the earth that we can use to survive and thrive as a species. And without prioritizing, hey, let's consolidate a little bit. That's one thing that I have to focus on personally. It's like consolidation. So I used to always go to the gym every single day. I'd go to the gym. I was almost addicted to it. Yeah. And as I've gotten older, I'm like, I need to just consolidate, stay at home and rest some days. Just rest. It's okay to rest. It's okay to chill out and allow my body to just be at rest and eat some good food and sleep a bit more than I normally would.
The good life.
Yeah. And
viver.
Yeah. And that's okay sometimes. And that kind of consolidates all of the work I've just previously done. And same thing economically speaking, it's just crazy that we have to just at any cost have to grow every single year. We have to grow. And it's the thing is humans have an inherent desire to reproduce. It's one of our main primal urges, which even though there's supposedly some population collapse is going on in some places, but inherently humans want to reproduce and create more people, and we're being allowed to do it. Well, we have been allowed to do that at an unnatural rate because of probably capitalism, like being able to go to work for 4 hours and get a week's worth of food, which would otherwise in the past take you like weeks and weeks or months to produce. And so our population has been allowed to balloon unnaturally because of capitalism.
Yeah. That's what
and
Paul Ehrlich calls the population bomb.
Okay, yeah. So, I mean, there has been a population bomb. I think in 1900 there was 1 billion people, and now there's 9 billion or 8 billion.
Yeah.
And so we've had this massive population bomb.
Yeah.
But the problem is now there is a codependent relationship with the population and capitalism. So capitalism needs the population to keep increasing so that there's more consumers, so that there can be more growth, economic growth. But, you know, in terms of just like, if you really think about the foresight, like a population decrease is beneficial in terms of a eco movement or a group, like basically being more in harmony with the earth, and in terms of consolidation. But obviously not the way that I don't believe like there should be, I don't think they just need to be honest with the people. Like, hey guys, we need to probably decrease the population a little bit. Like, it should be, let's try to have less children so that our children can have a better future. Not like trying to implement, like bad medicines or I don't know what they're trying to do. There's a lot of conspiracies about how they're trying to decrease having wars and mass or genocides and mass amounts of people dying.
Forced sterilization.
Yeah, things like that. I mean, a lot of this could be. A lot of the people would say those are conspiracy theories about how they're trying to reduce the population, but
Fujimori did it in Peru. They tried to sterilize all the indigenous Incan girls back in the 80s.
Well,
90s.
I would still argue that there's still, especially in a place like the UK where there's national public health care, if I don't think it's very obvious or overt, it might not even be happening, but I wouldn't think it's not beyond reasonable belief to think that they're still trying to get rid of certain types of populations, like in the world, like in China, the Uyghurs, the Uyghurs. They're
Tibetans.
like, these people are not conducive to the type of society that we're trying to grow, and it's like social engineering of like, okay, let's reduce the population of these people because these people don't fall in line with our plan.
Yeah, or not necessarily the mainstream culture.
Yeah, or in
ethnic group.
And in the West, I would say like people that are like free thinkers and are maybe err on the side of conservatism and not just like, oh yeah, capitalism, let's just grow at any cost, and I love Amazon, I love it all, I love everything, just give me everything that you're going to give me, and let's just go along with it. People that are not in line with that narrative, I would argue, you would think that just logically, if you look at other less developed countries that do it, other countries are doing it, they'll reduce the population of types of certain groups they don't like. They might be doing it in slightly more subtle ways in the Western. Everything in the West is more subtle. It's like corruption in third world countries. It's called this. It's a back end corruption. So let's say, okay, we've got $2 million for this plan, and then the money disappears. They're like, we need more money. We ran out. We've already reached the 2 million. And we need more money. And then the corruption's on the back end. But in the West, it's front end, so they build in the corruption into their book. So okay, even though the park's only going to cost $5 million to make, let's just say it's going to cost $10 million, so that there's no actual, on paper, there's no corruption. It's all built into the plan. So in terms of the population thing I'm talking about, in those less developed countries, they're maybe a bit less, what's the word I'm looking for?
Strategic.
They're a bit less obvious with their... Sorry, they're a bit less obvious here. They're a bit less subtle about how they get rid of certain populations in developing countries, but I still think in the West it's highly possible that they're,
historically, talking about United States and Europe again and Britain. Yeah, there was specific efforts to get rid of certain populations. It's not really happening today. In fact, certain like indigenous groups like the Cornish or the Scottish or the Manx from the Isle of Man are coming back a little bit. But you still go to certain parts of the world, like in China with the Uyghurs and the Tibetans, they are being eliminated by the Chinese. And the Native Americans, maybe they are coming back in the United States in some places. I don't know, really. Some of them more successfully than others. But there are lots of indigenous groups around the world which are stateless and don't have territorial rights.
Yeah.
So that's the advantage of ecological confederalism, is that it relates to that local level. So it relates to giving power to indigenous groups, First Nations, if you will, and seeing them being empowered, even if they don't necessarily need to become an independent country right away.
Yeah, and that's the thing. The groups that always seem to get reduced in terms of population are always the groups that are not conducive to business. Like they're the ones that their belief system or their way of thinking is not in line, or not, especially it's not in line with profits and business. Yeah. So like in Australia, the Aboriginals there didn't even believe in land ownership. It's like you're just passing through, I believe.
Yeah, I mean, they do have like a commons as well, where they kind of like have a sacred ecology, sacred land.
Yeah, but like before the Europeans arrived, from what I understand, from what I've heard, I could be wrong, they didn't even have the concept of land ownership.
Yeah, it was just like collective.
Yeah, you're just passing through. It's like
They're
everything
part of the land.
Yeah, you're part of it, and you're just passing through. So
it's like the Mapuches, the sacred, the idea of Itrofil Moyen, where they are part of the local ecosystem. The Aboriginals have got something else similar. I don't know what it's called. They've probably got their own name for it in the different languages there. But they would be part of the land.
Yeah.
Of that cycle of life.
So can you imagine they were there and they were just a bunch of Europeans came and said, like, we want this land. And they were like, well, nobody has it. It's just everyone's. You're welcome to this land. And then the fact that the Aboriginals didn't really subscribe to like land ownership or just like the system, the colonial system. I mean, I think 250,000 were just slaughtered, murdered, animals, like just shot or just basically they would just hunt them almost. It's actually one of the most unspoken about atrocities is what happened in Australia. It's probably even worse than what happened in...
It's an interesting point, isn't it, Ray? Because they were classed as flora and fauna until 1967.
Wow, yeah.
So you could go out and shoot an abo, mate.
Yeah.
Just for sport, mate, because you guys like shooting a roo or a brumby.
Yeah, they were basically classified as animals. Like, you could just shoot them, like hunt them almost.
But they're still having a lot of their land taken away for kind of mining interests, bauxite or iron ore or whatever.
And the thing is, then what happens is when they finally been given rights, but their whole... I guess their whole population has been decimated firstly by that generational trauma, and then secondly by the what's the word? Like they're currently a lot of Aboriginal populations are addicted to alcoholism, especially in the rural.
Rife.
So yeah, so they've basically, but now they do finally have rights, but their minds and their bodies have been poisoned by this dependency and consumerism, and they basically everything that they were has been poisoned, and they finally have some more rights, but it's like their direction has been corrupted by the system. So it's like it's just the future is very bleak for them. They would need like some really strong spiritual leaders to come through that kind of remember the old ways, but even still those would be trampled by, I imagine, if any of those
continued exploitation of their lands.
If any of those movements got strong enough, they would.
Well, you got Yidinji people. That was one I looked at recently. Northeast.
Was that Sudan? Is that no?
This is in Australia. Northeast Queensland. You got the Yidinjis as an example, and they have been trying to campaign for independence from Australia. And there's something like 600 different Aboriginal languages. I mean, the whole it's a big island. It's a continent. Some people say, and certainly, if the Yidinjis or another group could become their own independent country, the Tiwi Islands of Northern Territories, or the area around Arnhem Land, that's pretty much all Aboriginal still today, then that could become their own decentralised independent country. But the Australians don't want to do that because They don't want to lose the power, for one, and also the potential economic value of that land. So they can keep them dependent, whether it's through drugs and alcohol or other forms of subsidies, because they're too afraid of institutional reform. They can't even vote to get rid of the constitutional monarchy of Britain. So these things take time, but they're pushing for it. They've had Aboriginal Voice recently, which is a vote on whether or not Aboriginals should be recognised as having rights in the Constitution of Australia, but that got voted down because the Australian right wing is saying, the Aboriginals shouldn't get these types of rights, and they get influenced by the mining lobbies and the other business lobbies. So it takes a lot of effort. It takes a lot of social movements to come together and push hard, lobby hard against the government to improve these different rights and respect for the land.
Yeah. Well, it's going to take... The thing is, leaders need to be uncorruptible. That's what we need. We need uncorruptible leaders, because I'm sure the Aboriginals have leaders, but I'm sure those leaders have are in the pockets of the mining companies or in the pockets of big business.
There's a few that come through, like I can't remember what she's called, but then when the king went to Australia, it was in the news recently, she went a bit berserk and said, "You're not a fucking king, mate! Get out of here!" and then a load of security guards came running up and said, "I'm not really sure if you should be saying that, Sheila."
Get rid of her.
Kicked her out the door.
But yeah, I mean, that's the thing everywhere, though. It's just, the idea of a leader, I think there's an attack on leadership. There's these silent financial forces, like you were saying, the banks or whatever, and they only allow certain leaders to come to the forefront who are corruptible. They have to have somebody, and like you look at the Epstein Island, or you look at the P. Diddy list or whatever. It's like it's almost like they only let people become successful in terms of a leadership role if they can be controlled on some level, which is very concerning. And society needs to break these shackles. Every country needs to break free of those shackles. And the key is to not be you can't allow your values to be corrupted by money or by things or material things. And that's what they really want. They want people to be corruptible by money or material things, so that way the values can be eroded, and then they can further enslave the people wherever they are. And I mean, it's crazy now that we can't, just because, and here's another thing I just want to say, just because I advocate for Aboriginal rights or African rights doesn't mean that I'm not proud of my European heritage either. Obviously, man. Yeah, that's the thing. They try to conflate that, you're just you have white guilt and you hate yourself. And no, I love being white. I love being European. I love the great things that the people of my history and heritage have done. Yeah. But that doesn't mean that I'm proud of all the bad things.
There's social sustainability of every group of people, every culture, isn't there?
And that's the thing. I want each respective ethnic group or demographic to have their own autonomy and their own pride and power and
their own homeland,
dignity and homeland. Yeah, I had a theory that I pitched to you. Maybe I pitched it to you. I was like, what they should do is what the global leaders should do is we're at the point now where we're smart enough, and I still think all the wars are pretty much orchestrated by the banks and stuff like that. I don't think that the wars that we're going through right now are organic.
Well, I think it's multiple factors, and maybe that's your
it's reductionist,
adabsurdism.
Possibly, yeah, but I think it's surely
one factor though. It's important.
If I'm evolved enough and you're evolved enough, to just have this conversation and be like, hey, look, I don't want everything. I don't need to have everything in the world. I don't need to have more things. I'm in my little 1-bedroom apartment on George Street, and I'm pretty happy. Yeah. And we need humble leaders that say look, things and materials are not the most important thing. The most important thing is people's general happiness and health in the world. And the way to achieve that is and also they need to just, in my opinion, a good way to do it would say, look, give everybody that wants a homeland, every group of people that wants a homeland, let's give it to them. So let's give the Aboriginals a homeland. Let's give the white Europeans a homeland. Where other countries,
we've already got a homeland, I suppose, but the indigenous groups, and let's just remember there's 7,000 languages around the world, in 200 nation states. So the advantage of ecological confederalism is that it recognises all these different indigenous groups as having the rights to have their own territory and spatial justice outside of the city, because they're often rural, outside of cities. And that if they were given spatial rights, then they'll be able to take part in direct democracy.
Yeah. Well, that's what I think should happen. Basically, every group of people that wants their own land should get it.
Yeah.
And then no other outside influence should be allowed to interfere too much with that group people's land. I mean, you can trade with each other and stuff, but redefine trade. There shouldn't be any blockades or embargoes, or because obviously some groups of people are going to be larger and wealthier, and they're going to have more power to kind of influence trade. But then there should be a neutral zone. So each country should get a small equal kind of space of land with kind of resources. I think so basically each group of people should get a space of land that has resources that they can sustain themselves with. And then there should be the neutral zone of where it's just the globalist zone, and let the globalists, that can be the free capital, capitalism, whatever the hell you want.
But don't we already have that?
Well, the whole world is a globalist zone right now.
Yeah, exactly.
But what we should do is we should have conservative. We should have the preservation of each culture, give them a land and where they can preserve their religion, preserve their language, preserve their culture, and that's unaffected. And then have the international trade and
but if you have the
globalist
international trade, you're just reproducing the same system as before, except in the current system, you get certain cities where that already happens. These capital cities like London, New York, Tokyo, Paris, and those are the kind of areas where people come to do business. So what you're saying is, give all these cultural groups the opportunity to have their sovereignty, to be able to control their own food systems, have their languages, but still have the big capital cities.
Not the cities, though. But I'm saying even geographically separate the globalist zone. So I think everyone's afraid of a globalist government or a one world government or the new world order. So I think let that happen. Just basically designate, say for instance, let's take all the land imagine America, 50 states, right? Okay, let's just to simplify it. Give each state to a different ethnic group, or whatever, or demographic, or so if the Jews want, the Jews can have Illinois.
But there might be certain areas where people don't want to aggregate by ethnicity or culture, and they want to have a mixture.
Then you can move to the globalist zone. So then there's going to be let's just say, for instance.
But that's different to what you were saying before, just to tease out your argument a little bit for the sake of debate. The globalist zone sounds like a complete anything goes free trade area.
Exactly, yeah. One currency. It's going to be one currency. So imagine, let's just say the whole of Africa.
Isn't that the same as a tax haven or a capital city?
Well, no, but we need to separate. So basically, there's going to be just say, for instance, let's just say Africa. Forget about homelands. Let's just forget about the idea of we were here first and this is where we need to be. Let's just say okay, forget about your homeland where all your ancestors fought for. Okay, but you're going to get some land. You're going to get land where it's beautiful, you can sustain yourself, and there's enough for your people. So anybody that wants to kind of subscribe to their conservative cultural traditions and values, and they want to preserve that, we're going to allot you some land and give each group of people that identifies differently and they can't basically subscribe to someone else's belief system, you can get a plot of land. So let's just say North America. We'll split up North America into little states where each demographic can get whatever they want, or they have their land. Each demographic has their piece of land, and if it's the Jewish land, no Black people or Asian people are allowed to move there. If it's the Asian land, no Black people or Jews are allowed to move there. So basically,
that's fair enough. So
you're allowed to keep. Basically, you're allowed to have nationalism in your home, in the little plot of land that's given to you. Then let's just say,
But this free trade zone, what's the difference between the free trade zone of like a free port, which already exists, and its relationship to the capitalist centres where you have the stock market?
But we're not gonna. So we'll have like sustainability, and the country needs to be each of those nationalist countries and areas needs to be self-sustainable, where they're not allowed to be influenced by the external free trade zone.
But if you're having the free trade zone, that's going to make an imbalance, because that area will absorb more wealth than everywhere else.
Exactly.
And then it will end up dominating everywhere else again, and it'll just be like...
No, but it has to stay separate. No, but you have to draw it into the thing. It has to stay separate. So
why not just have trade in each region?
Well, you shouldn't... The globalist zone shouldn't be allowed to... The globalist zone needs to stay separate. So if you want to just go be a materialistic fuck and all you care about is money and business, like what we have kind of right now, go to the globalist zone. But it's like a different value system. So like if you want to go grow a wholesome community with people and you want to basically be heterogeneous, is that right?
Yeah, I think so.
If you want to go just be with white people and you don't want to have any mixtures, you don't want to have any like Muslims or black people around you, or if you're a Muslim, you don't want to have any white people around you or Jews, but you want to have peace, go to your little homeland area. If you want to go make money, you can go to the globalist zone where you're just...
What happens if the globalist zone decides that it's not enough because you're concentrating all the greedy people and they just start a new empire, and then they go out into space and colonize Mars, and then
but it has to be written
take over everywhere?
Well, it has to be written into the law, and it has to be accepted by... So like we need to basically come up with a global law. Like, okay, guys,
I think it's got to be a relatively balanced system throughout, without reproducing the same kind of neoliberal capitalism in one zone and just getting rid of all neoliberal capitalism, and then having a more balanced economics with ourselves and nature throughout the world. Then you don't have that over-exploitation.
I just think there needs to be a place where people can exert their like capitalistic and just like competitive desires.
Well, why can't you be competitive whilst having local sovereignty and democracy?
That would be ideal, but it's hard, like, because of what we were experiencing with your synthetics park thing. You've got a guy in this country who's obviously like Ian Wood, who's got immense amount of wealth that he's extracted from the globalist economy, but
he's built it up as well from his grandfather and his great grandfather, who got big money from fishing.
But imagine if he was just like if he was isolated imagine if he could only exert that influence in a zone where it was accepted that like imagine if he was just what's the word you want to be a billionaire, you're allowed to do that in the globalist zone, but you're not the economic zone, but you're not allowed to bring that into the UK.
I don't believe that it will stay in balance. It will just quickly turn into the same system again, and those corporations will go out of that zone and just annihilate the rest of the more ecologically sustainable areas.
Well, the globalist zone should not have any military force. Only the countries that and there shouldn't be any guns. All the countries should be disarmed.
But if you're concentrating all those type of competitive or more capitalist, almost psychopathic people together, surely they're going to get loads of guns anyway, because they like guns. I mean,
it's obviously it's a utopic vision.
I think it's quite dystopian. In the sense that you're getting all those types of dystopian people, we put them together. What happens if you get loads of those types of people together? They go and start the next McDonald's or the next East India company.
I mean, yeah, I think it's obviously unrealistic, but if I was like if I was God, if I could play God, I would say, look, like each country is going to basically be like Switzerland in respect to its own culture. Like, so like the Muslims can have their own Switzerland, the blacks can have their own Switzerland or Wakanda.
There's a logic there, and that fit. Wakanda sits with ecological confederalism. But yeah, I'm not sure about these kind of free trade zones. I think they just end up being imperial powers again.
Well, I'm saying you have to write that into on the onset.
They won't respect it, Ray. It's not sustainable long term. They'll go out into outer space. They'll start mining the heavy metal asteroids, bring that back and take over the asteroid belt, and end up taking over the
Well, that's
planet.
fine as long as they don't come back to their little Muslim Sweden and fuck everything up for them.
Well, maybe we'll have to beg to differ on that one, or agree to differ.
I know, just But anyway, back to. Sorry, we went on a tangent there, but
I think it's all right. I think
like,
maybe that's a kind of useful conclusion to the discussion, in the sense that there's always going to be a bit of disagreement about how this vision looks like, but unless you have a kind of empowerment from below, then you can't move towards a full democracy. And I think that's what's quite interesting about the American right wing, is that with like the Tea Party movement and the Republican movement, is that they're trying to look for a new system. They don't think the neoliberal system works. They think it just dominates the corporations, and they do want to have more power to the people. I think some of the the Americans that you see who maybe took part in the uprising of January 6th, they didn't have the critical tools to really understand what was going on, to get through the disinformation campaign, to get through the media, which is perhaps fallacious, was telling them lies, and the conspiracy theories, to be able to critique the conspiracy theories, because there weren't opportunities to get the educational level to be able to understand things fully. So, but they ultimately, it seems like some of them were actually looking for a great democratization of their lives, because they wanted to critique the Federal Reserve. They wanted to critique the central state, because they're saying there's too much power in the central Washington or whatever, and that's why people like Trump managed to rally these folks, because they see him as somebody who's going to change the system.
Yeah, well, I guess, basically it seems as though each election cycle people want somebody who they think will actually implement change. And so I think they thought especially if people aren't happy, if you have a bunch of people that aren't happy, I think people are like, well, any change is better than no change at the moment. I think that's what Trump tapped into. He's like, look, I mean, he's a bit of he's quite very outspoken. He's a bit of a loose cannon, but people are just like, well, something's going to change.
He taps into people's sense that they need to change the system. Whereas Kamala Harris, perhaps, she's representing this continuous
just like
Washington elite.
We're going to have men and women sports. There you go. We're going to give sex change to the people in prison.
Well, I think that's a different...
everyone's like, no.
That's a different thing.
Well, I'm saying people were sick of what the status quo is like. It seemed as though we're going a direction that's maybe not super logical or sustainable in terms of ideologies, and people were afraid of they're like, okay, we can't keep going in this direction of just accepting these quite radical identity ideologies and radical, but the thing is, what I would say is like what they've done, I used to kind of, I do think I would possibly prefer Trump to Kamala. I would definitely prefer him to Kamala, but I don't think he's the savior that everyone thinks he is either. I don't think you're allowed to get to that level of power without a lot of corrupting influences behind you.
Well, yeah,
anywhere.
He's lost huge amounts of money. He's an unsuccessful businessman, but because his organisation's at that size, he can absorb those debts and fiddle the books. He cooked the books. But the point is, he offered a vision of change, even if actually what he was doing was just creating the same system again, because he's just empowering all the business oligarchs like Elon Musk to take more power. Yeah.
Well, they wanted us to choose it. It's like they want you to choose evil by showing you something even worse. They're like, you could have this really shit thing or just keep choosing this evil. And it
looks like change, but it's not really change.
I just don't believe that almost everything that's in the mainstream media, whether it's Elon Musk or Trump, I just don't think that these figures, I mean, I guess somebody has to rise to the top. The cream has to rise to the top in some senses, and the most interesting.
It's not necessarily a meritocracy where the most talented people.
Well, it's the money. Yeah, I mean, you can pay for views. Yeah, you can pay for exposure. That's where we're at right now. I mean, on YouTube, you can pay for 1 million views or with Google Ads, you can pay. It'll tell you, we'll give you 1 million exposures if you pay this much. So if you got
weird, isn't it?
Yeah, so
how the technology is changing exposure to.
Well, when YouTube, on the onset of YouTube, a video could kind of go viral within its own means, and that was really cool. But now, I mean, I'm sure some still do if you already have a good following, but like it's
content.
Yeah, it's very hard to get like a massive following from a grassroots thing like this podcast, for instance. Like the chances that anybody sees this podcast, and it's not like really viral content either. It's just kind of like a conversation. It's not gonna, and with how many millions and millions of videos are being uploaded every day. I mean, and this is an important conversation. Like, I think you're a very educated person. You're well traveled. You're a professor. You know, I'm reasonably well educated, even though I don't really participate much in academia anymore. But I've traveled a lot and I've seen a lot of the world.
Yeah.
But this is arguably a more constructive and educated conversation than like the Joe Rogan podcast with Trump. I would argue. Like when you listen to that
I'd hope so.
Like when you listen to a podcast with Joe Rogan and Trump, like, okay, it's interesting because you've been told it's supposed to be interesting and it's been put in your face, and it's like the elections has been hyped up, and it's like, okay, what's he gonna say? It's like anticipation that's gonna be interesting. But if you actually listen to the content of it, it's like, it's not that interesting. It's like, okay, this guy's a egomaniac, and this guy, he just has a lot of interesting guests on, and he's just kind of allowing the egomaniac to talk. Yeah. And it's like, but if you compare it to like this conversation, for an educated person, this conversation's probably more interesting.
It's got a bit more depth than just Trump's gonna paint his next lavatory in gold leaf, or his.
He's always just talking about, I did this, I did that, I'm doing this, I did this, and I'm great, and this is what we're gonna do. It was great, and like it's funny to listen to, and it's kind of funny. I could do that too. I could be like, oh yeah, I did this. Oh, you should see what I did here, and I did here, and I did here.
He's just boasting, isn't he?
Yeah, I mean,
it's just a megalomaniac.
But they say like small minds talk about people. Great minds talk about events, and brilliant minds talk about ideas. I don't know where I read that somewhere, but
I like that quote.
Yeah,
I'm going to use that, but I'm going to quote you.
Yeah, you should, because I don't know where I found it. So I may have dreamt it up. I'm sure I didn't. But it was me. I came up with that quote. It was me. I came up with this great quote.
It's like Trumpies, the back of your seat.
It's like the vicious cycle. Like, yeah, I'm going to talk about how small minds talk about people. Great minds talk about events, and brilliant minds talk about ideas. It was me that came up with that quote. Just go straight back into the. But no, I mean, that's the thing. And these important conversations, they probably won't get heard because I'm not backing it with any money. I'm not paying for any advertising. I'm not paying for views. I'm not paying for anything. And so you'd hope in a fair system, which we know it's not, but like you'd hope in a fair system that
the quality would rise to the top.
The quality would rise to the top, but it's not. It's the
capitalized products.
Exactly. It's the products that have the most money behind them. They're just being pushed in your face, and you just don't really have a choice but not to see them. You know, it's like
the financialized feces always floats to the top of the sewer.
Yeah, the pus floats to the top because it's being pushed to the top rather than the cream. The hormonal pus from the cow's uterus or whatever the fuck it is getting pushed to the top for you to drink. But you should be consuming this cream, this creamy conversation.
The financialized feces always floats faster than the cultural cream.
Yes, the cream's very slow moving.
Well, that's a good conclusive point, I suppose.
Yeah, well, we'll do it again. I would love. Jeremy's one of my favorite people to talk to because Jeremy is a professor, so he's almost required by law to have some type of citation for all of the shit he talks.
Exactly.
I think he has to have some credibility because he has to have some educational backing and academic backing for what he talks about. So
peer review the scientific research to get internationally assessed so that it avoids these disinformation chambers of nonsense circular.
Jeremy's a accredited shit talker. No,
Confusion.
he's accredited. He's an accredited. He's a doctor, aren't you? You have a PhD.
Yeah, I've got my doctorate in human geography, and one thing that came out of my doctorate is that, and maybe we'll come back to this another time, Ray, is benthic rights.
Okay.
Rights of the seabed benthos.
I don't know what that. We'll have to touch on that.
I'm going to tell you about that another day.
Yeah, well, come back. I mean, we've had a shortage of guests, so if we have to just keep having you on repeatedly until someone else decides to come on, we will.
We'll keep chatting.
That's
good.
You can come on every week if you want. I don't care.
Thanks for the invite. And
Yeah.
it's good coffee as well.
Oh, yeah.
So if you want to come down and have a chat here with Freedom Worldwide podcast, the coffee's good.
Yeah, while it lasts. It was on special at Little. It was Indian week, and we got some cardamom coffee. So
Slanjavar that, or as we say in Cornish, Jägerstar. Cheers.
yeah. All right. Well, God bless Cornwall, and
Kerno Bisficken.
that's Cornish.
Agendith Oradas. Our day will come.
All right. Well, awesome. Thanks so much, Jeremy. Really appreciate having you on. I have to get I have work. I have to go serve pizza to some hungry
I'd
mouths.
like to try and go to the swimming pool before it closes.
Okay, so Jeremy's got to go swim. I got to go serve pizza to some hungry
Abydonia masses.
the hungry masses on their Christmas shopping events. They're tired from walking around shopping all day, and they just want their pizza. Anyway, thanks again, Jeremy. Really appreciate you coming on, and it's
Always
been
a pleasure, Ray.
Yeah, we'll have you on this next time you're happy to come on. You're welcome to come on anytime you want. Just let me know.
Next time I'm in George Street, I'll give you a knock.
All right, sounds good. Thanks again. All right, Freedom Worldwide podcast signing out. Freedom Worldwide.
Freedom.
All right, let's hope that it actually recorded. Last time the sound didn't record.
Yeah, I think I'm 100% sure you did. So we can listen to that in post.